and end up having voice coaching instead. I mean, it's not a bad point.
Well, like lots of people on Twitter referring to his oral lessons. I mean,
exactly.
So I mean,
it's a national joke now.
I said to you yesterday, I thought it was a bit of a non-story beforehand. No, it really was. There's no question at all. It was breach of COVID.
He broke the rules. There's no question.
As they all do. I mean, there's so much. I tell you what, rule breaking. I'm fascinated by Donald Trump.
Yes.
What a game changer! What he announced. I mean, just extraordinary. I mean, he is literally like the bull in the china shop.
He wants to take over the Gaza Strip. I was saying
he wants to build a hotel and
put
a
casino in there. It'd be like the Jersey Shore. It'd be great. I mean, there are parts of the Gaza Strip that are actually lovely.
The people in Gaza right now will be a lot better off than under Hamas. Maybe they should make that choice.
Maybe they should go, yeah, OK, please, bring it on.
You want to keep choosing Hamas.
You know, put Ivanka in charge of the Strip. No problem at all. Julia Hartley-Brewer here. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 a.m. It's all happening. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. Shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in on far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, boy, do we have a rip-roaring show for you. Great to have your company joining us. I'm with you all the way until 1 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, it will not surprise you, we're going to be talking about two, well, very much disputed territories in the world. Donald Trump has said the US will take over the Gaza Strip, permanently relocate all Palestinians to either Egypt or Jordan, whether, well, was it permanent or would they be allowed to return once he'd turned Gaza from a hellhole into the Riviera of the Middle East. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Plus, Keir Starmer intends, we're told, to push ahead with the deal to cede sovereignty of the Chagos Islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean and pay double the originally agreed £9 billion of your and mine taxpayers' money offered to Mauritius to lease back Diego Garcia, a joint UK-US military base. That's what the Mauritian Prime Minister has claimed. We're now looking at £18 billion of your and my money going to pay another colonial power in cahoots with the Chinese to lease back something we already own. How insane is that? And by the way, I thought we didn't have any money, which was why we had to take winter fuel allowance away from 10 million pensioners and impose inheritance tax on farmers and put up a tax on jobs. No, wasn't that the reason? Wasn't there a black hole a few minutes ago? I would love to hear your thoughts on both of those stories. Also, on everything else we're going to discuss, including in this hour, Valdo Calocane. He's the paranoid schizophrenic who killed 3 people in Nottingham. Controversially, was not actually in the end charged with murdering those 3 people. He was not forced to take his antipsychotic medication despite a history of extreme violence because he didn't like needles before he was repeatedly discharged back into care, into the community. This is a major review of his NHS care has revealed that. Coming up in the next half hour, we're going to have a press conference with the families of those 3 victims of Calocane, and we hear what they have to say about the abject failings of both the NHS mental health care and indeed the police over many, many months that basically resulted in this man being free to kill their loved ones. Also, that big press conference yesterday about Lucy Letby. An international panel of experts has concluded that Lucy Letby, the NHS nurse, did not murder a single baby in her care. It's an unprecedented intervention into the conviction of a serial killer. 14 world-leading experts reviewed the 17 deaths and collapses of babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital. They claim that all had perfectly reasonable medical explanations, and Lucy Letby is behind bars in a terrible miscarriage of justice. We'll talk about that coming up later as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of those stories. In particular, though, I do want to hear your thoughts on what we've heard overnight. Waking up this morning to Donald Trump has done a press conference again, standing beside Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, the first foreign leader to come to visit Donald Trump since his re-election, which again in itself is a big key signal to the world. Donald Trump says the US will take over the responsibility for the Gaza Strip, relocate Palestinians, Jordan, Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East, and he says turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. What is your reaction to that? Is this a brilliant game changer? It's going to solve the issue, or is it this is the ramblings of a madman? How could this possibly work? Palestinian people won't agree to this. Will any of the other Arab states agree to this? Some of them have already said no. Or is he actually facing the absolute reality? Was it the Palestinian people and their representatives don't want a 2-state solution. They want a 1-state solution that involves the wipeout of Israel. And that is not going to happen under Donald Trump's watch and should not be allowed to happen under any civilised nation's watch. I want to know what your thoughts are. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk, then your message to 87222. You can get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. And of course, don't forget that calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1, standard network rate message. But if you do call us, we will call you straight back to get you on air. I'm delighted to say welcome back to the show. Conservative commentator Benedict Spence is here. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
And a very, very good morning to have you here because you are incredibly well-versed and knowledgeable about so many of these sort of international affairs. I mean, oh bless him. He's looking all sort of...
What are we talking about?
Oh, me? Oh, gosh. Don't know. You do.
I thought I was here to talk about the football.
You know them apples. You know them apples. What did you make of what Donald Trump had to say? Actually, before I get to you, I'm sorry. I've got a clip. I've just been reminded. I've got a clip of what Donald Trump had to say about the US taking over the Gaza Strip. Let's have a little watch and listen of what he said.
The US will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute, I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad, this could be so magnificent.
It is an extraordinary intervention. This was not one of his off-the-cuff unscripted remarks, having a little chat with people. This was scripted remarks at a press conference with Netanyahu at his side. Benedict Spencer, what do you make of it?
I mean, presumably he heard protesters chanting "Free, free Palestine" and thought, well, if they're just giving it away, might as well. Nobody else seems to want it.
Can I build a casino and a hotel there?
Never want to turn down free real estate. This is, I think, about putting pressure on all sides, basically, to behave. I mean, obviously...
You think it's one of his negotiating positions?
They're not actually going... Gaza is not about to become the 51st state.
That's Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it depends who wants it more. That's not going to happen. I don't think that there are going to be American contractors or soldiers on the ground in Gaza. That's not going to happen.
I mean, American people do not want American troops anywhere in the Middle East.
And they also don't want the question of citizenship given to most of the people living in Gaza, which might become a question. They become territories incorporated into a part of your global empire, and suddenly they start turning up on your doorstep, and there's about 2 million of them. They don't want them any more than the rest of the Arab world wants them. But this is about putting pressure on. First and foremost, it's about putting a bit of pressure on Israel, about saying to the Israelis, look, if you're not going to play nice, then we can just do what we want with this. We are big and powerful enough. But the whole thing about relocating people out of Gaza to the rest of the Arab world is also about saying to them, and you're going to have to play nice too. It's about saying to those countries, you're going to keep your peace agreements, you're going to put the money in, you are actually going to get involved in the policing of this area as well. You're not going to be supporting any particularly nasty elements. It's all about that. I think people need to remember Jordan is not in a particularly great state, but it's not so much about Jordan.
Half of the population of Jordan is Palestinians.
I mean, depending on who you ask. I mean, have you been to Lebanon recently? Most of them are both Palestinians and Syrians, and everyone's a refugee. Interestingly enough, there was a country that was once called the Riviera of the Middle East. It was called Lebanon, and now it's an absolute basket case. But I think the main one here is about Egypt. It's about putting pressure on the Egyptians, probably to take some people in. Egypt is in a really difficult position financially and in terms of its own population.
And they get more than $1 billion in aid from America every year.
That's not even the main thing. It's food. They literally cannot produce enough food. They can't afford to buy enough food to feed their own population.
Especially since the Ukraine war, that had a massive impact on wheat production.
Huge amount. And they rely on other Arab states as well to take in aid from them. So this is, I think, about strong-arming the Egyptians into playing nice, and the Jordanians to a lesser extent.
Though, they don't want Palestinians. They know this is I know we can talk about there are lots of innocent people who just want to live a happy, normal family life, and I'm sure there are. There are also many, 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 many people among the Palestinian 1.8 million people living in Gaza who are massively radicalised, who believe it is, they've been told since birth, their main aim in life is to kill Jews and eradicate the Israeli state. Now, I'm not sure that's what Egypt's looking for. Now, here's the thing, though. Lots of people are saying, look, this is a game-changer moment. And part of it, and as mad as a lot of it sounds, because Arab states are going to go, what are you talking about? Because I think a lot of Arab leaders would be perfectly happy with this. They would not, though, be doing what their people would like, and they are always constantly worried about extremism among the people in various different countries across the Middle East. Here's the thing, though. Is Donald Trump not recognising the reality, which is that you cannot reward Hamas for what they did on October the 7th by giving in to, now we'll finally push for the two-state solution. 2, Hamas and their backers in Iran and Hezbollah and all that don't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution that doesn't involve Israel. It involves the whole of Israel disappearing and every Jewish person in the world, by the way, not just in Israel, disappearing by violent means. So there isn't a two-state option. There isn't a moderate Palestinian government waiting in the wings, waiting to take over. That's pie-in-the-sky stuff. So, and it is unacceptable, and completely reasonably so, for the Israeli government and their backers in the US, and it should be backers like Britain and France and Germany and the rest of the EU and other civilised Western nations, to say it is unacceptable to go back to the status quo ante, where Israel has to have a terrorist organisation that has threatened to invade them again sitting on their doorstep and have their entire nation rebuilt using international money. That's unacceptable and shouldn't. Israel would be insane to allow it to happen.
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to be...
So what is the other solution?
Well, I think that the Israelis are going to be allowed to keep killing people in Gaza. As much as there is a ceasefire in place, it's not really...
They're going to be allowed to continue to defend themselves in Gaza.
Well, defend themselves, commit genocide, they're going to kill people. Doesn't
they're not
matter.
committing genocide.
They're not committing genocide. But the point is, they're going to kill people. They're going to go out and they're going to find those idiots who turn up now with their Kalashnikovs and the balaclavas, and they're going to go, right, well, you've come up from above ground now. We know where the entrances are. We're going to kill all of you, and we're going to do it at a fairly leisurely pace.
We used to think it was a good idea to kill terrorists.
But it must be said, there is a lot of pressure also actually on the Israelis to be doing this, strangely from some parts of the Arab world.
Yeah.
Let's be clear, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, they are the ones that are going to be expected actually to pick up the tab for the rebuilding of this area. They are not friends of Hamas. They're not going to allow that money to be poured in there. And that is why then there is pressure on Egypt to say, you're not going to let there be weapons be transferred in and all that sort of thing. You're going to play nicely. You're going to keep your side of the deal. And we actually heard, there's another part of the press conferences that we had, Netanyahu saying there is going to be normalization with Saudi Arabia. If this was an actual problem, that wouldn't be on the table, but it's going to happen.
That was what was on the cards. Just it was going to be likely to have been signed within a few days of when Hamas actually attacked on October the 23rd. So up the 7th, I don't know what the 23rd from. I do want to hear from you on this. And you might say, what's it got to do with us? Well, because the Middle East has been a problem for the West as well for many, many years, and our important ally in Israel. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. I'm wondering if this is a glib point. No, of course I don't mean this for the idiots on social media who will suddenly say to me, I mean, Palestinians need somewhere to live, and we can't have them staying in Gaza if they're going to continue to have Hamas's leadership. There's some islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean that don't have very many people on them. Chagos Islands, they've been in the news as well. More pressure on Keir Starmer right now, and PMQs today, of course, and no doubt going to be asked about this as well. But Chagos Islands deal was bad enough as it was because we own the Chagos Islands. We were ceded them by the French in a deal. Yeah. Giving them, and I heard on Radio 4 once again today, giving them back to Mauritius. Mauritius have never owned the Chagos Islands. They're also a colonial power, that says. They're not giving them back. Basically, giving them to Mauritius, who, in cahoots with China, are by the way, a hostile nation state. And then paying them for the benefit of being able to lease the joint UK-US military base there, and Diego Garcia, one of the islands of the Chagos. We were told we were going to give them £9 billion, front-loaded, pay a lot of the money up front over 100 years. Now, the Mauritian Prime Minister, the new MRIP guy, says he's negotiated a better deal, and it's going to be £18 billion. Guess what this works out to, as my good friend Tom Harwood pointed out? £350 million a day. And as he suggested, maybe someone should put that on the side of a big red bus. That might get everyone's attention. Huge sums of money, British taxpayers' money, is going to be paid to a foreign power in return for us giving them something they have no right to, but some mad international court that makes absurd rulings on everything with no jurisdiction over us. It's not binding. Claims that we have, all because some mates of Keir Starmer's seem to think it's a good idea.
I think it's actually more than Mauritius's sovereign debt. It's a huge amount of money that they have no right to. And there were lots of people doing the sums last night. It would have paid for XYZ number of things that this government has already said that we don't have the money to pay for. So it is outrageous. And yes, it is basically so that the human rights lawyer circuit in London can pat themselves on the back and say, job well done. Many of whom, of course, have taken money from Mauritius as part of this. It's not like they're all acting in good faith here. But, I mean, what's perhaps most egregious about all of this is inevitably what will happen is after this deal is agreed, the US will just take Diego Garcia and won't give it back. Yeah. Because actually it can strong-arm Mexico and Canada all it wants. Who cares about Mauritius? And I know maybe there are people who will feel very offended by that. I've said it on this programme before. I've said it elsewhere. Who cares about Mauritius? It isn't even a particularly important country in the prism of the African Union. No, it's not important.
But this is nice beaches there, honeymoon there, lovely. But it is genuinely bizarre. It's the idea that we would. This is like literally someone coming along in the street saying, "Oh, we reckon that John at number 84 has a right to your car," and going, "Oh, okay, fair enough. I'll give John the car. Oh, and I would like to still be able to use something of the boot occasionally to store some stuff. So can I pay you a few billion every year for the right?" It's properly insane. Yeah. And again, it's this legal world. I'm genuine. I'd love your thoughts on this. I'm pretty sure this is going to come up at PMQs. I have to say, give us a call on this 0344 499 1000. Before we go to break, I also want to get your thoughts very briefly on this press conference we understand is going to be held by the family members of the victims of the Nottingham killer, Valdo Calacane. This, as they find it, they fought and managed to win the full review into the independent review into basically how this man, a paranoid schizophrenic, history of violence, how he was able to be on streets of Nottingham and after numerous instances where he'd been violent, able to then kill 3 people, the 19-year-old students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kuma, and also caretaker Ian Coates, before attempting to kill 3 other people. This is way back in June 2023. But again and again, there were chances to stop him. People warned in the medical notes that he was going to be violent. Oh, he didn't like needles, so they didn't force him to take his medicine. I mean, we're into the same territory as are with Axel Rudikabana here, aren't we?
I think this comes... I actually think a lot of it comes down...
Dangerous people, no one's dealing with them.
It comes down to a culture in this country which is that you can't possibly be perceived as being mean to people, and it starts in childhood where everyone is special and you have to affirm their feelings and all that, and that's why you end up with dangerous psychopaths not having to take their medicine, which would make them less dangerous, because it might upset them.
But also, you take your medicine, end of. If you don't take your medicine, you're straight back in because you're a danger to yourself and others. I don't know what's complicated about this.
Easy.
Putting the safety of innocent citizens first every time. They always talk about trying to make us safe, but they never do the things that would actually make us safe.
Which is ban hurty words on Twitter.
Ban hurty words.
Yeah.
Sylvian. ID cards. That'll make us safe. 10:19 is the time. Up next, we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to Jake Wallace-Simons about what does he make of Donald Trump's plan for Gaza and what are the implications for us as well. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. We'll be keeping you abreast of that press conference from the families of the victims of the Nottingham killer, when that starts very, very soon. Don't forget, later we've got Prime Minister's questions. A lot of pressure on the Prime Minister over the Chagos Islands, over breaching of lockdown rules in Christmas 2020. Do you still care about that? I mean, yeah, you know what? I still do, because the hypocrisy is just so extraordinary. And we'll be talking to one of the key independent medical experts, Xu Li, who spoke at that press conference yesterday and claims that, well, Lucy Letby, the woman convicted of killing 7 babies and the attempted murder of 7 others, didn't murder a single child and is the victim of a massive miscarriage of justice. That's all coming up. Right now, let's talk to Jake Wallace-Simons. He's the author of Israel-Phobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred, and what to do about it. He's also a columnist now at The Telegraph. A very good morning to you, Jake. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear us, Jake? I don't know if you're on mute. Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear us? I know he's talking. Can you... Jake,
how's that?
That's a bit better. I thought we stopped doing that in 2021 at least. I don't know. Jake, thank you so much for joining us. Just your initial reactions when you woke up this morning to what Donald Trump had to say last night about basically US will take responsibility for Gaza. Everybody's permanently displaced from Gaza, the Palestinians, and we're going to turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East.
Well, I don't know if you had this experience, Julia, but about midnight last night, I was woken up by a loud thudding sound as millions of jaws hit the floor around the world. Went back to sleep, but this morning I was awoken to a message, a WhatsApp message on my phone, which said, "Make Gaza great again. This is a fantastic idea." Now, that was not from a MAGA farmer in Alabama or a neocon. It was from my friend in Gaza, who's currently in Gaza City. I spoke to him on the phone. He said that he and everybody he knows are fully behind Trump's proposals because they don't want to live in rubble for the 20 years it will take to rebuild their houses. They don't want to live in tents. They don't want to see their children having to rely on aid handouts. You know, we have so many millions of refugees around the world, many of them seeking to make a life in Britain and risking their lives to do so in the Channel. And yet the Palestinians are supposed to put up with horrendous conditions brought upon their heads by Hamas just to satisfy the two-state solution demagoguery of ideologues in the West, largely. So he was up for that.
So that's interesting that he was in support of that. I don't very much think it's going to be supported by the likes of Hamas, who are in control of Gaza once again right now. But this is the issue, isn't it? Israel cannot have Hamas in control of Gaza and allow that another October the 7th to happen. We're constantly told that all the Arab nations wring their hands over the terrible plight of the Palestinian refugees in Gaza, but do absolutely nothing to help them. They certainly don't want to accept them. We've already had overnight Arab states go, no, we don't want Palestinian refugees. My God, there are Labour MPs here who are talking about we should take Palestinian refugees. I mean, I'm literally not a single one comes to my country over my dead body. I mean, it's genuinely insane. Very radicalised people, many raised from young age to be taught that their main aim in life is to kill Jews and eradicate the Israeli state. You can absolutely understand why Egypt and Jordan go, no, thank you very much. But is this all pie in the sky stuff? Is this Donald Trump, although it wasn't an off-the-cuff remark, he was reading a statement at the podium. Is this him sort of thinking, oh, I might build myself a nice new casino and hotel in the Gaza Strip and make some money? Or is this actually a realistic proposal or one of his bargaining chips?
Well, I think it was pie in the sky for Donald Trump becoming president back in 2015, 2016. Pie in the sky ideas have a habit of taking place when Donald Trump has them and has the determination to push them forward. In terms of the Riviera comment that he made about Gaza, that's the real tragedy of the place. That if the Palestinian people in Gaza had not elected Hamas in 2006 and instead had travelled the path of peace, that place could be by now a Riviera under Palestinian ownership, under an independent Palestinian state. It's 40 miles from Tel Aviv, the most liberal, innovative and wealthiest city in the region. It would have benefited from Israeli technology, Israeli support, the Israeli health system, and so on and so forth. It could be thriving. It's got wonderful beaches, great for tourists around the world, and yet it's a hellhole because they chose Hamas in 2006. Now, whether this is a bargaining position by Trump or he actually means it remains to be seen. Certainly, there are many obstacles and unanswered questions about this. I mean, how can America suddenly take ownership of a piece of land in the Middle East? That's an unanswered question in terms of international law, of course. How Hamas will be got out of Gaza, how all this is going to take place, many questions. But what we don't have is the old questions, which are, how can you have a two-state solution with a Palestinian leadership that has turned down offers of statehood time and time again, is infested with extremism, corruption, and ineptitude, and forms its identity on resisting Israel rather than wanting to attain its own country for its own purposes and the peace and security of its own citizens? Those are the old questions. Nobody has been able to answer those questions for decades.
Well, indeed,
Now,
that is part of the problem, isn't it? You know, how long is this going to fester? And it's just one of those interesting things where you've got people saying, you know, they're refugees, but then saying, you know, we're refugees, then saying, but this is our homeland. Well, are you refugees or is it your homeland? The homeland they want is Israel. That's not going to happen. And everyone talking about this two-state solution, like, it's not going to happen. You're not going to get what you want. That's not going to. Israel can't let that happen. I don't think Western states should allow that to happen. Donald Trump's made it very clear it's not going to happen in his watch. So what's the next best option? But the reality is, you know, the leadership of the Palestinian people from Hamas onwards, and there is no, I keep pointing this out to people, there is no Lib Dem coalition option, that there is only hardline extremists. They don't believe in a two-state solution, really. They believe in the eradication of Israel. Again, that's not going to happen. So what are the options? Now, chances of Donald Trump being able to strong-arm Egypt into taking a load of people from Palestine, I mean, if they wanted the people from Palestine, they could have opened their border many, many years ago. They've chosen not to. They have stronger border checks and border controls than Israel's had for years, for goodness sake. They didn't allow people, Israel allowed people from Gaza to come in and out to work, you know, on those kibbutzes and like, I mean, Egypt's got, you know, barbed wire and 3 lines of walls, for goodness sake. What on earth is the leverage that they've got, that the US government has got, to force, cajole, persuade the likes of Egypt and Jordan to take these people in? And would they leave if they did have that option?
You're absolutely right. You know, Egypt has had its own troubles with Hamas, who tried to subvert its own politics some years ago when the Muslim Brotherhood were in power there. And so have other Arab countries bordering Israel as well. Now, in terms of Egypt, we saw some scenes just a week ago where a mob from Egypt demonstrated in a violent way by the border against having any Palestinians coming into their territory, and ended up looting the aid trucks that were heading into Gaza. That's the appetite that the Egyptians have for accepting Palestinians into their country. And yet, we mustn't overlook the persuasive power, if you want to call it that, of a certain Donald Trump. We saw it with Canada recently. We saw it with Mexico. Countries put up a strong resistance to his suggestions, but then once they get hit with tariffs or whatever other levers he may wish to pull, they soon buckle and fold, because Trump unapologetically realizes that he has that power in a way that no other president in living memory has. I think with Egypt, there are security guarantees, there's trade, there's diplomatic pressure. There are all sorts of ways in which the US can bring its might to bear upon trying to force Egypt and other Arab states to take Palestinians into their countries. I mean, let's not forget, in Jordan, up to 2/3 of the citizens are Palestinians anyway. Indeed, indeed.
Can I just ask you, just finally, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, still befuddles me that those words could be put in one sentence. But Foreign Secretary David Lammy says that today, we need to ensure there is a future for Palestinians in their homeland. That's rather a difficult state, isn't it? Because, of course, many of those Palestinians think their homeland is where Israel is now.
Well, I mean, that's right. The Palestinians, as I've said, the Palestinian leadership anyway, has resisted any offer of a state, including 100% of their demands on several occasions over the past few decades. But I would suggest that there is a difference between the Palestinian leadership and the people as a whole. The people has a spectrum of moderates through to extremists. Of course, there are serious problems with radicalization, particularly in Gaza, and extremism and tribalism and rejectionism and all the rest of it. But there are people, moderates like my friend who I spoke to this morning, who just want a better life for themselves and for their children and don't want any more war. He loathes Hamas, that everyone he knows loathes Hamas too. And it's those people who've really been crushed. Yeah. Their dreams, their futures have been crushed by the inept, corrupt and fanatical leadership on both sides, not just Hamas, but also the Palestinian Authority, by the way, that pays millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars each month to terrorists as reward money. These people have been crushed by them, and it's the moral failure of the West that has chosen to support the corrupt and fanatical Palestinian leadership against the interests of the Palestinian people.
Absolutely. Jake Wallace-Symes, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's come back to you, Benedict Spencer, and I do want to get to your calls. If you give us a call on this, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Because a lot of people will say, foreign wars, not a problem. It's too complicated, don't have to worry about it. But it has become our problem because we've had march in the streets. We have people. We've had 5 MPs for Gaza effectively elected at the last general election, independent candidates running against the official Labour candidate because they think that Labour's stance, which has not, I believe, been as sure as it should be on support of Israel, isn't supportive enough the Palestinian people. I mean, there you go. So David Lammy again. I think David Lammy had problematic views on this issue, wants to placate a certain constituency for Labour supporters. This is an issue here. We also have Labour MPs, so backbench Labour MPs, who have called for Britain to take Palestinian refugees from Gaza.
But that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't actually be that ethnic conflicts halfway across the world are influencing policy here, not on what we believe to be sort of a moral basis, but based on the tribal ethnicities of MPs and people in this country. And I'm afraid that is a result of mass migration to this country. If you import people from around the world, they do bring their issues with them. And that's not just limited to the Middle East. Pakistan, India, we're going to get all of
we've
that.
Seen running battles on our streets
between Hindus and Muslims based on cricket games and things like that. And there's going to be more of this because, as we've all heard, we're going to increase the population of this country by a net figure of about 5 million over the next 10 years, and that's going to be about 9 million. That's going to be about 9 million people coming from elsewhere. So more of this stuff's going to keep coming. And the other thing to point out is, as the US embraces a multipolar rather than a unipolar world, there are going to be more wars. So there are going to be more ethnic conflicts that we are going to have to be paying attention to.
Happy Wednesday, everybody.
Hey,
it's always a cheery show, isn't it, with Benedict?
Guys, don't vote for those. Don't vote for those parties that lie to you, that say we're going to reduce these things and then they up it. Anybody who ever says it was a mistake to get rid of Boris Johnson.
Oh my God!
Me
too. The Boris wave of immigration. We're going to be living the consequences of that.
The worst Prime Minister
for the next 100 years
in our living memory.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about lockdown breaches. That's what brought him down ultimately, plus everything else. A little bit later in the show. Right now, there's the families of the victims of the Nottingham attack by Valdo Calacane. They are holding a press conference following the publication of a damning NHS report into his care or lack of care that left him to be on the streets, able to kill their 3 loved ones. We're talking about that up next. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:38 is the time. Cheery Benedict Spence is here telling us about, imminent World War III, but that's always helpful. Talking about what's going on in the Middle East, we talk about the Chagos Islands, we're also talking about what's happening at home. And are we safe on our streets? Because I don't think we are, judging by the latest damning report into abject failings by the authorities meant to keep us safe. This time it's the publication of an NHS report into the care of Valdo Calacane. He is the man who was convicted of killing 19-year-old students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kuma and 65-year-old caretaker Ian Coates back in June 2023. He also attempted to kill 3 other people. He was on a stabbing rampage as a paranoid schizophrenic. He's been sentenced to an indefinite hospital order, but as many of his family members of those he killed feared that he could one day be out. But there was a theme running through his clinical records, according to the review. It said he did not consider himself to have a mental health condition. He was repeatedly sectioned, repeatedly released, allowed to choose his own medication. He was not given medication using needles, which was long-term medication that could have kept him safe, because he didn't like needles. And again and again and again, despite repeated violent outbursts, he was freed onto the streets. Concern expressed again and again, even by his own family, about his ability to keep himself safe and safety of others, was ignored. Nothing was done. And 3 people, innocent people, lost their lives. Well, let's talk to Mike Neville about this. He's a former Metropolitan Police Detective, Chief Inspector, who's been following the case. Good morning to you, Mike.
Morning, Julie.
Same old, another day, another big report into what went wrong. Someone's going to say lessons going to be learned. Reality is we wouldn't even see this full report if it wasn't for the families of the Calacane's 3 victims who have fought tooth and nail, strong-elbowed to get the full details out. And once again, it's an abject litany of failure by so-called professionals, mental health professionals and the police, to actually take action against someone who was clearly, provably, obviously a danger to the public.
It's an absolute disgrace, isn't it? And the failings again, and the attempts by the NHS to cover this up and use the Data Protection Act so they wouldn't have to release the full report.
Oh yeah, just for people who don't know, they said that Calacane, despite his conviction, had a right to privacy to his medical notes, as if a convicted killer has a right to privacy of his medical notes. Genuinely absurd stuff.
Well, it is absurd stuff. And what you have here is a dangerous and violent man who managed not to see a GP or any mental health worker for some 9 months. What kind of system have we got? We used to have asylums in this country to put people who were very, very violent and possibly dangerous people. And the trouble is we allow people, this care in the community is nothing of the sort. Yeah. People are in the community, but they're simply not cared for. So, I also question what we see time and time again. How many of these social workers and whatever thought they might be accused of racism if they said something? What part did that play?
Yeah.
Also, we've got people with these mental health issues. It's overwhelming. Nearly everybody has mental health issues. So the consequence is that those people who really need to be treated, like Calacane, don't get that treatment.
Do you know what? This is one of the things I've always argued, is that when everybody apparently has got a mental illness, then you don't actually deal with the people who really need it. And this is where the resources need to be focused. But this is the thing. Again and again, people made decisions, and it was found in the notes. I think it was revealed late last year that one of his psychiatrists has said, I believe this man could kill, and yet still let out on the streets. But this is what we've seen again and again. And in a very different case, Axel Rudakabana, the Southport killer, we learned that caught with a knife, threatened to kill, talked about wanting to do a massacre at his high school, actually went back to his school and, with a hockey stick and beat people, obsessed with violence. Again, the evidence was clear that this young man was dangerous. The evidence was clear that Calacane was dangerous. But the default seems to be, there's a crisis, we'll take him into a mental health unit, and at the first opportunity, we'll put him back out on the streets, and fingers crossed he takes his medicine. But they seem to think that one of the reports last time he was released, I think, seemed to think that he was a very sort of kind and peaceful man. I mean, he was nothing of the sort.
Yeah, it is absolute madness. And then added to all this, you've got the police not executing warrants. When I was a young PC, the first thing you do, rather than do the school crossing patrol, you'll go and get which warrants were people wanted by the magistrates' court. He wasn't arrested for several months, which could have also brought him to the authorities' attention.
Yeah.
But what will happen here, Julia, is who will be punished? So perhaps a police constable or a minor social worker may receive some discipline or words of advice. But the people who have been in charge of the NHS trust, of the mental health services, of the social services, in the police, who've allowed this to go on, who've allowed people not to be checked for 9 months, who've allowed warrants issued by a magistrate not to be executed within a matter of days, they should be held to account, but they will sit in judgment of junior people and punish them as sacrificial lambs.
Whereas actually, it's an awful phrase, systemic, but just because something's systemic doesn't mean that individuals aren't responsible. It's also costly. It costs money to keep people in a mental health unit, and we're often told, like, oh, we don't have the money. And there's so much of care in the community was actually about, okay, there was closing down these horrific, Victorian mental health institutions, but also it was about saving a load of money because that care wasn't replaced in the community. Just at the press conference is going on right now, Emma Webber, who's the mother of Barnaby Webber, she has described the report into the care received by her son's killer as a horror show, saying everything that could go wrong did go wrong and there had been catastrophic failure. And the argument that these parents are making is they want to speak out, they want action now because they want to prevent this happening to other families. Another 3 people could have been dead, more than that if Callaghan hadn't been stopped. And this could be happening again on our streets. And again, we do see this happening again and again. People, largely when people go and do this, paranoid schizophrenics are more of a danger to themselves typically than they are to other people. But there are a number who are clearly a danger to other people. But again and again, there are concerns and it's known and no action is taken. What do we want to learn from this? Because the families are calling for a full public inquiry. They want to know who made which decision. They want people held to account. But I'm not aware of lessons ever being learned in any of these cases. So what can we do?
Well, what can we do? We can open up more secure hospitals to put in people who are known to be very, very violent. We need to put into place computer systems. The NHS is archaic. It's probably running on Windows 95. Some kind of red flag should beep, beep, beep. He has not been in contact for 1 week or whatever. Not 9 months. These are simple procedures.
Not in contact for 1 week. Automatically, you're returned to the institution. Nothing to discuss.
And there'll be the fact that you don't like needles. Well, this is really tough. If you want to be out on the streets, you'll take this medication and you report to the
police. But also, I'm surely tagging for these people. And again, I think everything gets into sort of people's privacy, people's personal civil liberties, as opposed to, and there is always a balance between civil liberties and safety. And, I think a lot of the time government gets it wrong, and they take away the civil liberties of the vast majority. But when someone is clearly a danger to themselves and others, then sometimes you have to take away some of their civil liberties. I would have thought tagging, weekly reporting, required to take the medication in front of a medical professional so you know it's taken. I don't know why anyone would think that was unreasonable.
Absolutely, because as I say, the phrase is care in the community. So if they're going to say this is the policy, give them some care. It's not freedom in the community to do whatever you like. And this appears to have been the case. No one seems to have noticed anything, and people have bodged and covered up. And as I say, all these things, I think sometimes people are absolutely terrified of being accused of racism. That's a really major
You think that
issue.
would have been a factor?
I'm sure that would have been a factor. And also, there's also the err on the side of lets people go. Well, we need to start thinking first and foremost of the vast majority of the population. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. So if you're a potentially dangerous person, I'm afraid you've got to sacrifice something. As you said, you either sacrifice your liberty and live in an institution, or you're given a tag and you're made to report to certain people so we can make sure that you're enabled to carry on living in that way.
It just seems so obvious. It really does, doesn't it? Mike Neville, always so good to talk to you, former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector. James Coates, who is the son of Ian Coates, he was the caretaker who was killed by Callaghan. He said Callaghan could have been stopped multiple times following the publication of this report. Benedict Spence, listening to all of that, what do you want to say?
It's just It's sort of staggering the way that in this country now we talk an awful lot about a mental health crisis, but it's never stuff like this. It's people with mild depression, it's people with mild anxiety, you know, the massive overdiagnosis of ADHD.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about middle-class people who'd quite like some pills to make their life a little bit easier.
Oh, and get an hour longer for their kids in their exams.
There is a mental health crisis in this country, and it is the fact that so many people with very serious schizophrenic, you know, multiple personality disorders, psychosis, that they are just left to their own devices, that there aren't the resources to treat or to detain them. That is the crisis.
Here's the thing. We say we haven't got the resources, but here's the thing. The cost of, apart from the emotional cost of 3 people being stabbed to death and 3 other people being rammed the car and could have died, the multiple cost of the court case, and he's in a mental institution now, and this inquiry and all of this, far exceeds, you know, looking after 100 people in that way and keeping people safe. It's absolute insanity. It really is. On every single aspect of anything to do with keeping people genuinely safe. I don't mean putting a mask on because there's a virus about. Genuinely keeping people safe in the streets in this country. We always end up spending more than we could have done preventing it in the first place. And we get the heartbreak in as well. Benedict Spence, thank you for that. Up next, we're going to take a break. We're going to take your calls. Love to hear your thoughts on the story we've just been talking about Donald Trump wanting to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East, but Palestinians will have to go. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Chagos Islands as well. 18 billion quid of your and my money, which apparently we didn't have a few weeks ago, but we do now, to give to Mauritius to take away something that a country that we own. I can't even get my head around this. It's so insane. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that. The number to call 0344 499 1000. This is...
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this Parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
The UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benedict Spence is here as well. Want to know whether you think that Donald Trump was talking common sense with his announcement overnight. We woke up this morning that the US will take over the Gaza Strip, relocate Palestinians, turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. Lots of other subjects coming up as well. What do you think? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's talk to Nigel, who's in London. Hello, Nigel. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Very well indeed. What do you want to say?
Good. Well, I'm just delighted that Donald Trump has made an effort to do something about a giant building site. No other world leader has come up with any ideas about the Middle East whatsoever. Radical as it may be, at least it's a positive step moving forward. And as everyone knows, no one's going to vote out Hamas in the area. They've got to be eradicated.
Well, they haven't had a chance to vote for Hamas in most of the last 20 years, but I mean, realistically not. I mean, you could argue with people living in Gaza, living in, well, we're told it was a prison, it was a hellhole even before October the 7th and then the subsequent arrival of the IDF troops from Israel. But I mean, maybe their lives would be a lot better in Egypt or in Jordan. Many Palestinians do live in Jordan already.
I'm sure they do. And the other thing about the whole story is, just imagine what an absolute turnaround and how better and safer it would be for everybody if it could actually be achieved.
Do you think it will be achieved?
Well, that's a very good question, isn't it? I probably think it might not be achieved. But look, unless you have some sentiment, some effort, some thought, and an idea, that's how things happen. They start like that.
Well, exactly. I mean, everyone's saying it's a game changer, but, it wasn't an off-the-cuff remark, that's for sure, Nigel. Thank you very much indeed. Some texts and messages coming in on this. Jeffrey says, handy for a Trump golf course, Trump hotel, Trump tower. Oh, no doubt at all that Donald Trump is looking at that, but again, wouldn't that be better for the people in Gaza? Alex says, this is seriously not a good idea. The Palestinians will never consent to be moved. Neither Egypt nor Jordan will ever agree to take them. The US cannot be involved in forcible relocation, as that would amount to ethnic cleansing. Now, people talk about this a lot, but the interesting thing is, of course, well, apparently they've already been ethnically cleansed from Israel. By the way, Jews were ethnically cleansed from the rest of the Arab world to Israel. Yeah. But also, this phrase, ethnic cleansing, this has been done throughout time. Yeah. But even since the Second World War by our civilised Western nations, in Europe, huge movements of not just hundreds of thousands, but millions of people have taken place in Europe with consent of authorities by, OK, you guys won't stop fighting. Right, the ethnics this are going here, the ethnic there are going there, there's going to be a border there. I mean, look at Yugoslavia, but it's happened in many other European countries since the Second World War. And it is actually more the norm post-war than abnormal.
I mean, it happened last year between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Over 100,000 Armenians were just told, well, we don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. And nobody cared. Nobody said anything.
I mean, there wasn't an ICJ report, and there weren't votes at the UN.
It wasn't simply a happy, you've got to move now. A lot of people were also murdered by the Azerbaijani military, but they've got oil, so we kept our diplomatic relations with them. As you say, it happens very frequently. The modern state of Turkey and Greece is founded on the idea that actually you can just pick people up and move them. Yes, it can be incredibly violent. People don't like to be moved, but it is not an unknown thing at all. It's only really recently become a thing where everybody goes, you can't possibly do that. It happens, right now, also, in Rwanda, the conflict that's going on over the border with Congo is based on the idea of people being moved from one area to another and what tribe actually has control over what part of the world. The end result of that will almost certainly be that the Tutsis end up taking control of part of Congo and effectively sort of normalising relations with Rwanda. Why? Because they moved, because the population's moved. Yeah. It's very common.
This is the thing. It's not as unusual as people think. Also, by the way, everyone talks about colonial powers in the West basically came and drew a line in the sand and decided where Israel was. That's pretty much all of the countries in the Arabian world. It's pretty much all the countries in Africa, South America. That's kind of how lines have got drawn over the years. But there, I want to squeeze in another call. This is on the Chagos Islands. Adrian is in Perth. Hello, Adrian.
Hi, Julia. Lovely to speak to you.
Lovely to talk to you. What do you want to say about the Chagos Islands? By the way, this is the £18 billion cost, we're told, for leasing back the Diego Garcia military base.
It's a subjective view, but I just wonder if this government actually like our people, because They cut the fuel allowance. They're penalising the farmers. Car industry alone is being hammered, but we're quite happy to increase it in China. But I do have an idea for the Chagos Islands. I think we should keep them. I think we should work very, very closely with the Americans. And if I was Keir Starmer, I would be talking to Donald Trump and saying, let's use the Chagos Islands as an assessment centre. Anybody who comes here illegally, they can be assessed over
Flown to
Chagos Islands. We've got a base there, or the Americans have, so we've got the infrastructure. We could set up those portable hotels, and then what we could do with the civil service, which would keep them happy, because they want to work from home, I think, I would put them out in the Chagos Islands 1 month on, 1 month off.
I love it.
And
I mean,
would give
they'd have a lovely tan at the end of it. I'm quite liking your work here. Benedict wants to come in there.
Why do those people get to go to a lovely Indian Ocean destination that I'm not allowed to go to? If it's a British territory, I should be allowed to go there, not people who are trying to enter the country illegally or anything like that.
I think, Adrian, that Benedict wants to go and build a hotel
They can go to the Falklands or South Georgia or somewhere where it's cold and snowy.
Miserable. That would deter them. I mean, why not? I mean, as I've suggested earlier, tongue-in-cheek, of course, why don't we just send the Palestinian people to Chagos Islands? They've got nowhere else to go. I mean, but this is the thing. Whatever it is, as mad as those ideas are, they're less mad than what Keir Starmer is planning to do.
But I think, we should give a civil service a task. Each worker has to assess 5 people a day. But I'd have also thought the Mauritians would have been quite happy, because according to the Green people, Mauritius should be underwater and they should be looking for new territory.
I love it, Adrian. Thank you very much indeed. We certainly live in a mad world. Genuinely, 18 billion quid. What else could you do with 18 billion quid? OK, it's over a period of time, but it's going to be front-loaded. And by the way, as my good friend Tom Harwood pointed out, that works out, I kid you not, over 100 years, 350 million a day. They should put it on the side of a bus, he suggested. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Would that persuade you? I wonder if that'll come up at PMQs a little bit later. So much more to talk about. Keep your calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. We are, of course, the home of common sense.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in on Farage, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God
spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Just coming up to 3 minutes past 11. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, always great to have your company. Great also to have the company of Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator. I just went to him earlier than you expected. Got off your phone. Benedict Spence is here. I'm delighted to say so much to talk about today. We've got so much to get through, and I do want to hear from you, in particular about Donald Trump saying the US will take over the Gaza Strip, permanently relocate Palestinians to either Egypt or Jordan. They've said they don't want them, by the way, and turn Gaza from a hellhole, he says, into the Riviera of the Middle East. I wonder if that would involve, I don't know, a Trump casino and a hotel. I wonder if that would be included. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. You can send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. Welcome your thoughts also on Chagos Islands and 18 billion quid if you're on my money. And indeed, this extraordinary press conference we've had from the families of the victims of the Nottingham killer, Valdo Callicane, who are basically just saying, you know, this is an absolute catastrophic failure that this man was ever on the streets, and he was clearly a dangerous, violent, paranoid schizophrenic, and he was freed not taking his medicine. They knew he wasn't taking his medication, and he was nevertheless still out on the streets. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because will any lessons be learnt from this big review and a subsequent inquiry? I think a lot of us sort of fear it won't be. Now, of course, another major press conference that took place during our show yesterday was the one about Lucy Letby. An international panel of experts concluded that Lucy Letby, the NHS nurse convicted of killing 7 babies and attempting murder of another 7 babies in her care at the Countess of Chester Hospital. They say she is a victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice, that she did not murder a single baby in her care. They claim that actually all of the babies' deaths and collapses can be explained with other medical explanations. We're going to be talking to Dr. Xu Li, a retired professor, about his findings. He was one of the leading medical experts who spoke at that press conference yesterday. Also, we're going to be talking about the latest madness involving migrants to this country. It turns out councils using your and my money, they don't have any money that isn't your or my money, they've spent millions to host new arrivals, including... Please put down your cup of tea at the moment, because you will splutter and make a mess. Asylum seekers and refugees being given taxpayer-funded PlayStations and DJing lessons. I kid you not. That is coming up a little bit later. I mean, really defies belief. It really, really does. Benedict Spence is still with me. Benedict, so much to talk about. We talked a lot about Israel. Let's come back to that briefly, because there's lots of other topics I do want to get to today. Do we think that Trump's plan for the US to take over Gaza is a sort of strategy, a negotiating tactic, like what he's been doing with tariffs and the threats to countries like Colombia and Canada and Mexico? Is this a serious proposition? Do you think this is more off the cuff, even though it was a scripted statement that he made? Do you think he actually thinks he can achieve this? And do you think there's any chance whatsoever of Arab nations agreeing to any of it?
I think it's a strategy to put pressure on Arab nations, and also to put pressure on Israel to a lesser degree.
Well, how does it put pressure on Israel?
Basically,
Benjamin Netanyahu was standing there like the cat who got the cream, quite understandably.
No, he wasn't, not for all of it. He didn't look particularly happy when they said that we're going to own it, we're going to develop it, because this is a serious part of the right of his political coalition, is that actually there are a lot of Israelis who do actually kind of feel as though maybe Israel should just annex Gaza and deal with it. There are people like that in the Israeli government, we shouldn't forget that. Yeah. And how is he going to be able to spin that to his political allies, who he relies on to keep him in power, Netanyahu? Not very easily. He doesn't want that. It would be seen as a bit of a political loss. If Israel sort of invested all of that time and effort into trying to clear Gaza of Hamas, only to then be strong-armed by the US into signing a ceasefire, and then the US comes in and goes, and now we're going to have this, that wouldn't go down particularly well, I don't think. So there is, in terms of getting Israel to agree to certain security guarantees, but it's mainly about getting, first and foremost, about getting Arab nations to agree to the funding of this because they want to sign it, and I think it's also probably to do with getting Egypt in particular to potentially consider freeing up more land in the Sinai to adjoin Gaza,
giving up some of their territory,
which they're not using. There's nothing there. That's why the Israelis, after they captured it, were more than happy to give it back because it's just a desert. But if you have enough money, you can use it to develop. But Egypt can't really use it for anything that it wants. It's a bit of a political basket case as well. But the idea presumably would be, this idea has been floated, that a patch of land adjoining Gaza on the sea would be freed up, and it wouldn't be owned by the Palestinians. It would probably be leased by somebody like the UAE, who would then give it to the local authorities in Gaza, provided that those local authorities were that way politically inclined and not Hamas.
I have a funny feeling that the people in Hamas, seems to me, organised criminals and terrorists, are not going to want to agree to this.
Which is why the Israelis are going to keep on droning them and killing them even though there's a ceasefire, just like they're doing to Hezbollah in Lebanon, even though there is a ceasefire. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, but when Hezbollah breaches the terms of the ceasefire, then they're entitled to retaliate.
Hezbollah hasn't done that, though, but the Israelis, under the terms of the ceasefire, are allowed to continue doing that. That's the thing with all of these ceasefire agreements. It's not a unilateral peace deal. It's Israel going, we've won, and we will now do what we want, and the others going, yeah, you will. That's basically what these are.
And this is the thing. A lot of people are pointing out, this is realpolitik. This is Emperor's new clothes stuff. This is Donald Trump pointing out two-state solution is not going to happen. We've got to resolve this. It uses up way too much. It is infecting Western politics. We have got 5 MPs effectively for Gaza right now in our own parliament. I was very unimpressed with David Lammy. When he said, his reaction to this morning, I mean, shock. I imagine his mother feels the same way. But as a foreign secretary, talking about, Palestinians, to be on their homeland, or they claiming Israel's their homeland. So sorry. By the way, there are plenty of Arabs, huge population of Arabs living in Israel, perfectly peaceably, and supporting IDF forces being in Gaza to protect them. By the way, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is this a game changer? Though, is someone actually saying, at long last, that two-state solution thing ain't going to happen? And also, here's the thing. Billions have been poured into Gaza. The IDF pulled out they pulled out 20 years ago. What did Hamas choose to do with all that money? Did they help the people build lovely hospitals? Well, they built hospitals to go above tunnels. They built weaponry and missiles, and they terrorized their own people, and then they terrorized Israel. They could have built the Riviera on the Med, and they chose not to do it. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Let's talk about also this press conference. It's still ongoing, actually, and it's the families of the victims of the Nottingham killer, Valda Calacane. I still remember vividly being on air that morning in June 2023, and we couldn't work out, the reports were coming through that the whole of the Nottingham city centre had been cordoned off by the police. What on earth was going on? Was it a terror attack? What was it? And then reports about gradually started coming through, and the horrific stabbing. 2 19-year-old students, that's Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer, and also 65-year-old caretaker Ian Coates. Their parents and Ian Coates' son, and many of us in the families have been basically fighting for justice ever since. Particularly outrageous, I think, the Valda Calacane, because he was a paranoid schizophrenic, was charged eventually with manslaughter and not with murder, whereas he was charged with attempted murder of 3 others. So how was he able, minutes later, to be capable of his actions? But that basically, they've got a new report, which the families have fought tooth and nail to actually get published in full, lays out bare what they call the catastrophic failure by not just NHS mental health care professionals, but also the police and authorities as well, that of so-called care in the community. Didn't involve care. He was in the community when he shouldn't have been. He'd been repeatedly sectioned again and again over the year before this awful killing. He's now not behind bars in a secure hospital, but basically pointing out that everything that could go wrong did go wrong. They knew that he was a danger, but they kept letting him come out, go free. He didn't like using needles, so they didn't make him take long-term medication. So he basically didn't go take medication for ages at a time, weeks and weeks, months at a time. The police, when there was a warrant for his arrest after one violent incident, didn't go looking for him. Even his own family members, we know from that documentary last year, were concerned that he was a risk to himself and others. Again, to me, we're in Axel Rudy-Cabana territory. Different scenario, not necessarily mentally ill, but but the same issue where someone is known to be a terrible danger to others and nothing is done.
Yeah, and the ease with which they're able to slip through the net, people like this, sort of suggests, and the fact that there's a lack of real agitation from authorities to actually get on top of this, suggests that these are not, in fact, isolated incidents, that actually it's sort of par for the course, and that we're fortunate in many ways that the number of incidents that then lead to people dying are as small as they are. We all, I'd say this much, those of us who live in big cities are becoming increasingly aware, it's really hard to miss it, the number of what are clearly very, very mentally ill people.
Oh, every single day.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Around the cities, London, Norwich,
on the streets,
recently,
public
Liverpool,
transport.
Manchester. It is very ubiquitous now. You just expect it, and people just keep their eyes down, because why would you want to engage
cross the
with
other
something
side of the
like
pavement,
yeah, absolutely.
and hope
but
it's not you.
They have become a common part of our daily existence in big cities. This is going to keep happening. Again, if authorities are not in fact made to get on top of this, but for that there does need to be a sea change again in how we approach mental illness in this country. Actually, people who are depressed or have ADHD or something like that, yes, that's important, but it's not as important as the people who hear voices in their heads telling them to kill people or see things that aren't there. That's much more important, and we need secure facilities with trained therapists to deal with those people.
But often you can't give someone therapy. I mean, sometimes medication, people can be safe if they're on medication, but if they don't take their medication, then they're unsafe. And if you're not actually seeing them take their medication, they're unsafe. But this is balancing the needs of the many against the individual rights of an individual with serious mental health problems.
My point is...
And it seems that authorities routinely get it wrong.
My point is they shouldn't be out there. They should be in secure facilities. And as much as people might think, oh my God, it's terrible, it's going to be like the Victorian Bedlam, it is as much to do with their safety. Well, it doesn't have to be. Most countries actually are able to run asylums perfectly well. But it's about their safety first and foremost, because actually you're not preserving their safety if you're letting them go out and be on the streets either.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Barnaby's mother, Emma Webber, she told a press conference this morning that the miscarriage of justice, she says, would have been brushed under the carpet were it not for the family's campaigning, and says that Callacane serves no punishment for his crimes. He resides as a resident in a hospital. He receives income from the state. She says he got away with murder. The father of Grace O'Malley Kuma, Sanjoy, he said that he would be asking the Health Secretary to order a mental health trust to hold individual doctors responsible for the failures in his daughter's killer's care. And I think that would be very, very important actually in future. You have to be responsible. I've always said this about, say, like, when parole boards are letting a paedophile out, they say, no, we think it's safe. OK, fine. So you're happy for him to babysit your kids for the weekend, are you? OK, fine. Put your money where your mouth is. Let him into your house. You go out, off you go. I mean, genuinely. So you don't want him to babysit your kids. Oh, so you don't think he's safe. Oh, good to know. But you're free to let him onto the streets with other people's kids because you don't live in that street. There really does have to be veering on the side of caution in a lot of these circumstances rather than the other way around, does there not? Look, I do want to hear your thoughts on this because it is outrageous. And again, if it were not for these families, and they're quite right, if it were not for them actually campaigning on this, if it were not for them and their ability to, they're very, very articulate, they're very, they've been very proactive in this. If it wasn't for them, none of this would be learned, will lessons be learned? And again, I just have no faith in lessons being learned, and I don't know why all of these authorities don't want to learn lessons and don't understand that spending money to prevent it would make more sense. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's also talk about Lucy Letby. Experts yesterday gave a press conference saying, look, we're world experts. We've come to this completely, we haven't followed the Lucy Letby case. Some of them, from abroad didn't know anything about it. They looked into the case of all the babies who she is convicted, not alleged, convicted of murdering or attempting to murder. And they say they believe she didn't murder a single baby. They say there is a medical explanation or a failing by a medical professional explanation for every single one of those deaths and those collapses of babies, and that she is a victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice. We've got the likes of David Davis, we've got campaigner Peter Hitchens, former cabinet minister Nadine Dorries saying that she is a victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice. What do you make of it?
I think it's a lot for medical experts to say definitively she didn't do it. I think that's overstepping the bounds. I think it's fair to say there are reasonable explanations for all of this, but actually to sort of sit there and say she absolutely didn't do it, I think is, given that they are in fact not police officers and they are not necessarily looking at all of the evidence involved, I don't think that they can make that step. It's clearly a very complex case. I think that's become clear. Even as it was ongoing, that it was a lot more
complex. Well, it was months long trial. By the way, weeks of deliberations by the jury.
Yeah.
They didn't just go after an hour, they reckon she's guilty,
No, but what
she's found not guilty in a number of the cases.
What I would say, though, is one of the things that did come out from this press conference is that, I can't remember the name of which one it was, it said if this was a hospital in my country, it would have been closed. Actually, yes. I thought that was more key. Even if she is found to be not guilty, not innocent, not guilty of these things, somebody should be going to prison.
Now, that's the key thing. I do not personally think there is an issue with this case. I'm trusting the evidence. Things that so many people who did sit in on that court case for months and months and months say, look, a lot of the things that are raised as here's a bit of evidence that questions that, therefore she must be not guilty. But actually, these are often tiny parts of a much bigger case in each individual circumstance. They went through each child one by one. This wasn't like, she was. Lots of people on the internet seem to think that, she was the only nurse on duty, it must have been her. That literally wasn't a part of the case. That wasn't the case. Okay, but there are so many people questioning this. I think faith in the law and faith in the justice system is so important. I think that the Criminal Cases Review Commission should look at this case, and there should be a full review and go through it again, because if she is innocent, even of one of those babies' deaths, even if it's not all, if it's one of them, then babies were dying unnecessarily in the care of this hospital. We need to know why. We need to stop it from happening again. I can't imagine how distressing it is for the parents. We know some of the parents have been speaking about how just awful it is to hear these claims about the woman who was convicted of killing their baby. They lost newborn babies that the medical profession say shouldn't have died.
It's really
was
tricky.
Your kid?
From what evidence that I have read, and I've not read everything about this case, but I would sort of tend to agree with what the jury came their result. However, as we say, the sheer number of people, babies who died, and she was not convicted for all of the deaths, let's remember there were others, it would also be in the best interests of other people for there to be a scapegoat.
I think,
And so I think actually that it is perfectly reasonable to reopen and have a look at this, because something, be it even if she is a mass murderer, even if she is a serial killer, there were clearly massive safeguarding failings that went on at this hospital that should have picked up after 3 or 4 babies, maybe, rather than 15, 16, 17.
It should be instant after wherever there's ever even one extra death that you instantly go in and go, right, is there a problem? I appreciate your thoughts on this. Do get in touch, 0344 499 1000. I also want to touch briefly on this mass shooting in Sweden yesterday. 11 people dead. At one point, they said they had a man in custody. The police, in a press conference, and then we were told that he had actually shot himself. We understand that there's they believe it was a 35-year-old man. No official information is out. It would appear, judging by what is around on it, that it was a 34-year-old native Swede, a man who's not known to the police, who had a gun licence. He had an automatic weapon. Went through this. Was a converted school. It's now an adult education centre, largely teaching foreign language students to a huge number of migrants who arrived in Sweden. And went door by classroom by classroom shooting people. Now, many people are also injured as well. It's the biggest worst mass shooting in Sweden's history. What I found really fascinating about this, though, was Sweden has had the most extraordinary upsurge in violence. Huge amount of gangland violence. It is now, the rape capital of Europe, having been pretty much the safest place in Europe, full stop, on any crime. There is now a bomb or grenade attack most days in major Swedish cities, where, of course, there used to be none at all. And this was noted in BBC, ITV, Sky and other new broadcasting reports talk about, there has been this upsurge in violence in recent years in Sweden. At no point mentioning, who's that by? Now, it may well be the case, we don't know what the motive is in this case. It may be a mental health issue. It may be someone feeling that they were retaliating against the immigrant issue. It's a very, very live political issue in Sweden. We literally don't know right now. So I'm not saying that. But to mention the massive rise in gangland extreme violence in Sweden, and not mention that it is almost entirely, according to Swedish official statistics, down to immigrant populations from certain parts of the world. It's not the Norwegians doing it, by the way. Not the Norwegian immigrants doing it. I think is actually. Let's use their phrase. Disinformation. It's deliberately misleading people.
It is.
Swedes haven't suddenly gone, Oh, I think I'll just start grenading people, and I think there'll be mass rape of women on the streets. They didn't start suddenly to do that. So what's changed?
Yeah, strangely enough, Sweden's actually gone through a very long process of becoming a lot less violent over the centuries, to then have a massive uptick in such a short space of time. It is bizarre. Hiding this sort of thing, trying to hide this sort of thing, as authorities do in this country, doesn't help situations. If you're not honest with people, that's how you fuel the reactionary
And it's not a conspiracy theory. That's how you feel people knowing you're lying to them.
Yeah, and that is what fuels... The Guardian has been talking for the best part of 30 years that the far right is on the march. Well, that's how you get it. I'm sorry. It's not rocket science. If you would like racist political parties, racist movements, violent, forced repatriation, this is stuff that is going to come to Europe. I suspect we will get both forced repatriation and I suspect also pogroms in Europe in the next couple of decades. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen because authorities were not prepared to admit you need to forcibly integrate people if they're going to stay here, and if not, you need to be honest about what's going on with people. They will not be taken for fools indefinitely.
People can see it with their own eyes. I mean, the statistic, again, one of the few countries that actually does have some actual official statistics. It's incredible. It really is. Again, your thoughts on all of that, give us a call 0344 499 1000. Lots more to talk about, including the Chagos Islands deal. Also, Keir Starmer approaching PMQs today. Lots of claims over his COVID lockdown breach with his voice coach, or all that help he needed, his oral help that he apparently needed. People are questioning that, aren't they? Funny that. We'll talk about that coming up. Plenty more besides. Taking your calls up next. Get on the phone lines. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
And so now we have this juggernaut of expert evidence from across the world that demolishes the evidence that was put forward. Let's be absolutely frank. And so it's the rate of the evidence, Court of Appeal, that is so strong now. It matters not that this didn't happen at the trial. We've got to deal with the situation we're in now. And this evidence says, look, you know, she did nothing wrong.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Just to let you know, in a few minutes' time, we're going to be talking to Dr. Shu Lee. He's one of those key independent experts who says that Lucy Letby is the victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice, didn't kill or attempt to kill any of the babies in the neonatal unit where she had them under her care. We'll talk to him up next. First up, let's get to your calls. Plenty coming in on lots of the big topics we're talking about today. Mark is on the line. He's in Mill Hill in London. Mark, you want to talk about Donald Trump's big idea for Gaza.
Yes, indeed, and good morning, Julia.
Good morning.
Pleasure to talk to you.
Oh,
I think you and I have spoken. I think you and I once spoke on LBC.
I've never heard of this station. I don't know what you're talking about.
Don't worry, they've been having a collective left-wing meltdown on the subject literally this morning. I was trying to talk to them, and as soon as they started making sense, they moved on to the next caller. So, well, typical. So there we go. It's interesting. I personally welcome it. I think it is a very positive move. Now, it's interesting. There are an awful lot of left-wing talking heads having a meltdown on this. From, I think one of the callers was from UNRWA. No surprise there. And also others on the media and political left are screeching about breaches of international law and how this. It's incredible because and none of this addresses is firstly the underlying fundamental cause of this conflict, which is not so much about land, but it is, in my opinion, religiously based. And they also seem to airbrush out anything that happened before 1948 as though it's not relevant, when, of course, it's absolutely relevant. And one of the things I think makes an awful lot of sense, and what I think Donald Trump has done, which is to kick this wedge out of the door where it's been for 75 years, is to actually start to bring into light the idea that the Palestinians and the Jordanians and the Syrians are really all the same people. And I know some people might say, but that's racist, but actually it's not. And I want to explain why that is.
OK, we haven't got too long, so let's not do the full Middle Eastern history, please.
No, it's fair enough. I mean, basically, at the end of the day, they're the same religion, the same culture, racially the same people, and they call themselves Arabs, and they're part of the Arab League.
Well, no, but here's the thing. You might be able to say that about, the British and the Irish, or the British and the Germans, and we wouldn't say, oh yeah, well, fair enough, I'll just go and live in Germany then, would we?
I think that's a misnomer, because basically both the Irish and Germans have different language, have had a different reign of kings, have had a completely different culture from us. So I think from that standpoint,
that's a different factor. Okay. Well, I mean, again, the main thing is, something's got to give, something's got to change, and nothing's worked so far. That's certainly the truth. Mark, really appreciate your call. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Stephen. He's on the line. Stephen, he's in Manchester. Stephen, you wanted to talk about the Chagos Islands, which are, again, back in the news today. For people who've just tuned in, Mauritian Prime Minister, new Mauritian Prime Minister since December, basically said, oh, no, we're still going to happily take the Chagos Islands off Britain's hands, and we're now expecting £18 billion to be paid to us for the privilege of taking a piece of land that we've never had ownership of at all. What do you make of that?
Right. Well, there's 2 points I'd like to make about this. Number one, it's degrading to Britain on the world stage. We will be seen, I'm sure we are seen, as a soft touch. As
total pushover, absolutely.
The immigration theme, but this will have a very wide implication, and for other overseas territories that we still administer. It's a terrible degradation before the world, so I'm bitterly annoyed about it as a member of the public. The other thing I'd like to say about it is that, like yours truly, has worked for 40 years in this country. I'm retired now. I struggle. I've got my pension and I've got a small local government pension. I'm just above the level where I could get any help.
Yeah.
And they've done away with my winter fuel allowance, saving a mere pittance in the context of this thing.
But Stephen, we were told massive black hole in the public finances, and they didn't have enough money to do that. But apparently, got enough money to pay the Mauritians randomly to rent back Diego Garcia military base, which we already own. I mean, it's
beyond
mad.
lunacy. It's beyond lunacy. And finally, I would like to say we're paying far too much attention to, in this case, yet another foreign court and its determination on this. The British people did not vote for this court. We voted for a British government. And I'm sick of us being, wagged by the tail, as it were.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on all of those counts, and I'm pretty sure our audience will agree as well. Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Stephen in Manchester. By the way, Nigel Farage is now obviously a Reform MP. He has put forward an urgent question to ministers to ask the Secretary of State for basically David Lammy, if he will make a statement on the negotiations of the transfer of sovereignty of Chagos Islands to Mauritius, because we keep being told, this 18 billion pig figure is wide of the mark. No. But we don't know what the figure actually is. I'm sure that is going to come up at PMQs in half an hour's time as well. We're going to take a quick break right now. Up next, we'll be back with Dr. Shu Lee. He is one of those independent experts on the panel. Gave a press conference yesterday saying that Lucy Letby is not guilty of murdering or attempting to murder any babies in her care, and she is the victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice. But why does he think that? Well, we'll find out next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for your company today. Benedict Spence is also still with me. I can get his thoughts on what our next guest has to say. He is one of a number of medical experts on a panel yesterday who have reviewed the medical evidence used to convict Lucy Letby. She is the nurse who was convicted of killing 7 babies in neonatal unit in her care at the Countess of Wessex Hospital in Chester. And she also was found guilty of the attempted murder of another 7 babies in her care. She is one of Britain's worst serial killers, or, as many claim, is she the victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice? Well, yesterday we learned from her lawyers that they are now appealing to the Criminal Cases Review Commission to look back into her case. Let's talk to Dr. Shu Lee now. He's president of the Canadian Neonatal Foundation. He's a retired neonatologist. Very good morning to you, Shu.
Good morning, Julia.
Really appreciate you joining us. And it's interesting, you among others who joined this panel, you were someone who's actually, interestingly, your evidence from a paper you wrote many years ago was used in the case, but by the prosecution against Lucy Letby. And you've questioned whether actually you were accurately represented in that case. Why do you believe that the medical evidence, the huge weight of evidence that has been brought against her in a trial that lasted many, many, many months, was actually not reliable and not beyond a reasonable doubt, and that she is an innocent woman?
I think the problem is that the defense did not call any expert witnesses on the medical side. And all they heard was the expert witness from the prosecution. And they had used my paper incorrectly. None of the prosecution witnesses had actually seen a case of air embolism before. Yep. And so they were making a lot of assumptions about the paper that were actually incorrect. And that was what got me concerned.
And the issue there was about the discoloration on the baby's skin, and it must be as a result of a particular cause. But actually, it was a misinterpretation of your paper. Now, I've spoken to barristers who told me, and I said, what did she have particularly incompetent barristers? Because she didn't offer. There was very little defence from her. She didn't take the stand herself to offer her defence. And there was this view that, well, maybe she hadn't been given a decent defence, but certainly she's tried 2 appeals. She didn't get rid of her defence barristers for certainly the first appeal. I know that. But I've been told actually, her defence barristers were, top notch. And what I understand is that they did have an awful lot of they'd got their own research into questioning a lot of the prosecution evidence, but they didn't present it. Most likely, we don't know for sure, but most likely because it didn't actually answer a lot of those questions, and she didn't offer much of a defence. Isn't a lot of the issue that there are an awful lot of people in this country, including many of the campaigners, who argue that the evidence about her being responsible for these awful deaths and attempted deaths is sort of circumstantial? She was the nurse who was on duty, and each case it must have been her. It couldn't have been anyone else. Whereas in fact, that wasn't actually the main thrust of the case at all. It was something sort of a very tiny part of the case, and that there was actually a lot of other evidence, yes, some circumstantial, but also much medical evidence that she was the person responsible for those deaths. Why are you so sure that she wasn't after such a lengthy trial and many weeks of deliberation by the jury?
So I'm not familiar with the first trial, so I can't comment on that or of the action of her solicitors and barristers at that time. What I did see was the small amount of information that I was asked to look at for the appeal. And that worried me because that was incorrect. And so I convened a panel to look at all the evidence, and we looked at all the medical records for all those babies and the statements to see whether it was good or faulty. And we came to the conclusion that it was not correct. So we felt very strongly that the prosecution witnesses got it wrong and felt that it was necessary to bring this forward.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is most of the independent panel that was convened had really very little knowledge of this case. Many of them from abroad. They hadn't been following this case. They were sort of given the documentation to sort of look at it from a totally new perspective, which is really important. How convinced are you and many others on the panel? I know you were sitting next to David Davis, who's a very prominent MP, who's campaigned on many sort of issues like this in the past. How confident are you that this case will be looked at again?
I hope it will be. I think certainly Sir David Davis and Mark MacDonald feel that it would be looked at.
Mark MacDonald's the lawyer, yeah.
Yes, the lawyer. The issue here is that, the independent panel did not come to this as a defense expert panel. Yes. They came to this as an objective panel that said, we don't know if she's innocent or guilty. Yeah. We're going to look at this, we'll put the truth out, and we will even put it out if it was not favourable to lose.
I noted that actually. That was one of the conditions for you doing this. There was that no matter what, it needed to. What your views had to be made public if you were going to be spending your time, which again is very honourable of you to do so. The key thing here is, of course, her 2 attempts at appeal have been basically thrown out on the basis that there wasn't any new evidence that couldn't have been reasonably introduced in the main case. You can't just sort of keep coming up with an appeal, every year. Criminal Cases Review Commission will have to decide if there is, something substantive that could change things. Do you believe that the document you've put together with the panel is sufficient enough that the Commission would have justification to allow the review of that and to send this back to the Court of Appeal here in the UK?
I believe it does, because we have come up with very plausible reasons why these babies died or were injured, and why the prosecution's case doesn't carry any water. Yeah. It doesn't carry any weight because it's all wrong.
And for those for those of us who are not medical experts, which again would have included the jury in the case, of course, as well, the plausible explanations, I mean, they're different in different cases, aren't they? But give us, if you would, a summary of the sort of medical reasons or you know, failures by other medics, the sort of reasons that you think would explain the deaths of some of these babies.
Right. So, for example, we found there were a lot of medical errors that, in fact, could account for many of these problems that we saw in the babies. And that was never brought up. Prosecution witnesses never identified any medical errors, whereas we saw a multitude of them. In almost every baby, there was medical errors. And they were serious errors that could have contributed to or directly caused the death of these babies.
And medical errors like being given the wrong drugs or the wrong size tube and things, I mean, proper... Clearly objective truth that these were medical errors.
Correct. For example, there was one baby who in fact was infected with a particular bacteria that was flagged to the doctors that this baby had this bacteria, and they never understood it, so they never treated it.
Right.
And in fact, the symptoms were consistent with this particular bacteria. So, I mean, that's a very objective example.
Yeah. Okay. And the big concern really, of course, is if she is an innocent woman, this is a terrible miscarriage of justice, a young woman, a young nurse who's been, accused of the most awful crime in the world, killing not just one baby, but numerous babies and attempting to kill others. There are another 4,000 deaths of babies that are being looked at, deaths or collapses of babies in neonatal care in hospitals where Lucy Letby has worked in the NHS. So, I mean, there's still an ongoing investigation. If it is the case that she is completely innocent and has just become a scapegoat, then of course the concern is that actually there have been terrible failings in this hospital, and that other babies may also still be at risk from incompetent professionals or a just incompetent management at this hospital that has attempted to cover up those failings. So that would be a concern for people as well.
I think definitely. I think that we have to look at all these questions because we only saw the 17 babies, so we cannot comment on the rest of the system.
Yeah.
But certainly I think there would be an obligation to look at everything to see whether or not, in fact, there are deeper problems than just what happened at this hospital.
I'm very much always in favour that we look at facts rather than worrying about people's feelings because facts matter. But we know that the families of many of these babies, I mean, quite apart from the fact that having a newborn baby die is just absolutely awful, for then it to be a court case and someone to be believed to have murdered your baby and a jury to have decided that. To have people now question this and say she is a victim as well, what are your thoughts on how parents of those babies that died or almost died, what are your thoughts on what their reaction would be?
I've worked with parents for my whole career, 40 years, looking after babies.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that parents want to know the truth.
Yeah.
And so if we are able to bring the truth to the parents, it actually brings them comfort and closure. And in this case, knowing what actually happened to their babies, I think would be very comforting to them. And it's also partly for that reason that we decided to undertake this work so that we can tell the truth to the parents. And this panel is the highest level panel you can find anywhere.
Yeah.
If they cannot tell you the truth, nobody else can.
Dr. Julie, I so appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much indeed. President of the Canadian Neonatal Foundation, recently retired neonatologist. Absolutely fascinating conversation with him there. Really appreciate him joining us. But Benedict Spence, listening to all of that, I have long queried the people who were saying that Lucy Letby is a victim of a miscarriage of justice. A lot of the arguments that have been given have been completely spurious, claiming, she wasn't the only nurse in the room. That wasn't the evidence. It wasn't a statistical. It wasn't a balance of probability statistical case ever. That wasn't what it was. But when people of Dr. Julie's eminence and some of the eminence of some of the other experts as well come to look at this independently, and I think it's very interesting that Dr. Lee basically said, I won't be involved in this unless we can publish the findings, whether they help Lucy Letby or not. Yes. Very honourable. Yeah. What he said just then, the parents need to know the truth. They want to know the truth. That was very important. Do you think this should go back to the Criminal Cases Review Commission?
I don't know if it should necessarily go back. What I would say is when it's something like this, of this scale, and again, this could go back to the Axel Rudy Cabana thing as well. When it comes to children and children dying and their safety, I've got no problems with stress testing the system as much as possible to find what was the root cause and how to avoid this happening again. Was it a mass murderer? Was it systemic failure? Were there problems at the hospital? Whatever it is, I've got no problem in continuing to do it, because the parents need to know, and also other parents need to know as well. How could they necessarily have faith going to the same hospital?
I wouldn't have my baby in that hospital, would you?
Exactly.
But this is the key thing also. But we also need to have faith in our criminal justice system, which I don't think many of us do right now. I certainly have faith in the jury system, but again, we know that mistakes are made because they can only base it on the evidence they were given, and there pretty much was no defence given by Lucy Letby. Her behaviour in court was really quite bizarre. There are lots of things that you could understand why the jury came to the conclusion they did in the cases they did find guilty. They found not guilty in a number of cases as well. I'm now at the point where I think this needs to be reviewed. It needs to be gone over. We need to see it all again. But I think for the good of the parents, the good of future babies and their parents, and indeed for the future of trust in our justice system. But I think there will be some people who just will always say that they believe any conspiracy theory. But I think at this point, with people of that calibre and that panel, I think I'm willing to have questions answered. I have a funny feeling the answer is going to be the same as the jury came to, but I think it's important, as you say, we're talking about mass number of babies who died. Let's be sure about what happened. 11:47 is the time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Get in touch. What do you make of this? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Get in touch on Gaza, on Chagos, anything you want. So much to talk about today, and I want to hear your views. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
You know, you can't tell me that a voice coach who has previously done everything on Zoom suddenly needs to come to London to give Keir Starmer an emergency voice coach lesson on Christmas Eve. I'm not buying it. It's absolute BS, isn't it?
I think that lots of people will be asking that. And also, just again, the way in which Keir Starmer campaigned on this with such confidence, as you say, it does suggest that lots of his anger and comments about COVID throughout 2021 and 2022 were somewhat overblown, to say the least.
Yeah, no question at all.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Kevin Saunders joins us right now. He's former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer. And Kevin, I'm sure that you were as bewildered as I was, given that we are really, really struggling with our national finances. Local councils saying they can't afford to do some social care or basic stuff. They're having to put council tax up because they haven't got any money. But it turns out that local councils are spending millions hosting new arrivals from abroad, asylum seekers and refugees. They're being given, I kid you not just homes, not just clothing and food and everything, but taxpayer-funded PlayStations and even DJing lessons, would you believe? Yoga sessions as well, and the full works. I mean, laptops, driving lessons, you name it, they're getting. I mean, I'm paying for my own daughter's driving lessons right now. I didn't know they were available for free. What do you make of this?
Good morning, Julia. Well, when I read the article, I had to pinch myself to make sure I was not dreaming.
Or was it April the 1st?
Well, indeed. I think the big problem is the council regard this as their money and they will spend it how they like.
Yeah.
They seem to forget that it's our money that we give them to spend.
No, that they take from us. I don't think we give it lovingly and willingly.
Well, I mean, we're being told that council tax is going to go up phenomenally.
Yeah.
And the great British public is not going to be happy that council tax is going up if they're going to use the money to buy PlayStations.
I mean, we understand necessities. Look, there's a lot of stuff that, I mean, council funding has gone down from central government, and the central government knows what they're doing there. Everyone will blame the local council, not them, for the cost of the things. They have to pay for lots of social care. And yet, when someone is shipped into their local area, you know, I live in Camden in North London, someone is shipped in, asylum seeker shipped in, they have to pay, they have to house them, you know, they haven't got a choice about that. But why does anybody need yoga lessons for free, DJing lessons, music lessons of any sort? Apparently, oh my God, I mean, instruction in circus skills was given to some, tickets to football matches even, I say, and PlayStations. Why on earth? I mean, these are treats. Frankly, these are birthday gifts for most families in terms of their cost. What on earth is a council doing, paying for non-necessities for people who've arrived on our shores illegally?
Well, I mean, yes, I agree with you completely. I mean, I was thinking of jumping in a boat myself to get a free football ticket because I can't afford to go to football. So, yeah, it's silly, really. It really is silly, and it's a complete waste of money. And what's more worrying is that the man on the street is going to look at what their local council are giving. Yep. They're not going to vote for them. That's why they won't be voting Labour, they won't be voting Conservative, so they're not voting perhaps for reform.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, of course, though, an awful lot of local councils, it's kind of like a one-party state. They don't change hands at most elections from one year to the next. But I can't imagine whoever you vote for, an awful lot of these councils, maybe Labour councils, I've got a funny feeling they probably are, trying to be all sort of right on and, opening arms. But I don't think most Labour voters want this. I mean, a lot of those voters will be people who are really struggling. They'll be certainly struggling with a 5% rise in their council tax come April. Many are facing 10% or more, some 3 million people in this country in failing councils. And they'll be saying, I've got to pay this extra money, but you're not even spending the money you already get responsibly. I mean, look, this is like someone who's worrying about paying the rent, going off and buying themselves a designer handbag. Tough, you haven't got the money for that because you still got to pay your rent and your lecky bill. It is such irresponsible spending. Is there a way that we can ban councils from doing this stuff? Like you're only allowed to pay for necessities?
Well, yes. I mean, you could introduce legislation saying just that.
Let's do that.
You can, don't let them do it. Let's stop it.
But again, these are the sorts of things that provide incentives, aren't they? Because there's so much talk. I mean, every single day we could do an item on this. We could have you on very happily, I'd like to say, Kevin, every day talking about this issue. It's not going away anywhere. Illegal migrants, it's not going away. The gangs ain't being smashed. They're not going to be smashed anytime soon because we've still got that incentive. Someone is going to provide those boats. Someone is going to provide an illegal route for people who want to get to this country. And they want to come to this country because we're a soft touch.
Yes, we are a very soft touch, and I don't know if you've noticed, but the numbers are going up again. People are coming across the channel again. It's not being reported as widely as I'd like it to be reported, but the numbers are going up.
Yep.
We're going to see more and more coming. We're going to get, we're going to spend more and more and more money, which really we ought to be spending on pensioners. We ought to be spending it on the winter fuel payments. I mean, electricity is going up again, isn't it? Where will this end?
I know. Well, I'll tell you where it'll end. It'll end where we got with the large parts of Europe, and we've seen here as well, is in a very strong political reaction from people, and we see what's happened, say, in Sweden, and we don't know who the perpetrator was of that mass murder, that shooting spree yesterday. By all accounts, it does appear to be a native Swede, but we also do know there has been a massive increase in violence, in rape, in grenade attacks, bomb attacks daily, gangs using guns and things happening on Sweden streets. A lot of migrants who've arrived in the country in that big wave 2015 onwards, who would otherwise be classed as illegal migrants but were allowed in the country, from many parts of the world where, rule of law is not a thing, and we're importing that problem here as well, because these people are walking around among us and we don't know who they are.
Yes, you're right, that we have exactly that problem. And that is perhaps the biggest problem that we have. We don't know who these people are that are getting off the boats.
Yeah.
And that is a real problem. I mean, men pretending to be children, minors, because they think that minors do get a better deal. So let's pretend to be a minor. We've had rapists, we've had murderers.
Yep.
We've had all sorts.
Well, we know from the security forces that we have undoubtedly also had terrorists. I mean, we know that. It is utter madness. I've said this every day about virtually every item. So many things that happen in this world, in this country in particular, are just utterly mad, and I do not understand why our authorities won't get to grips with it. Kevin Saunders, always good to talk to you, former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer. Yeah, he knows what he's talking about. Benedict Spence, who also knows what he's talking about. It is extraordinary, this. When I read these stories, I think this can't be true. This is on a grand scale. £141 million spent since 2022 on these extra initiatives, according to a Telegraph audit. That's only of 110 councils. That's just the one they got the freedom of information from.
And yet you criticise me for being so negative all the time, when these are the facts that are presented in front of me. What other conclusion is one to come to, other than that things are not going very well, and there doesn't seem to be any desire to improve these things from central government?
I mean, there's a longer conversation to have on this after 12, but are we hitting breaking point? Because I certainly see in Western Europe, in terms of the support for different parties, it does feel like breaking point, and I think the support for reform coming ahead, Labour right now, is indicative of that.
I don't know. Earlier on I referred to Lebanon once upon a time as the Riviera of the Middle East. Things can always get a lot worse. Actually, it does require some action, rather than just going, things aren't as good as they used to be.
The thing I find extraordinary is this abject failure of action, but also the lack of will from our political classes. They are absolutely ostriches, heads in the sand, refusing to see reality, fact, playing out on our streets. I just find it just weird. But I think it's weird that they're pretending it's not happening when everyone else can see it with their own eyes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube on your connected device, it is absolutely fabulous you're still with us. We're here all the way till 1 o'clock. I'm joined throughout the show with Benedict Spence, Conservative, whichever you want, and his check jacket. If you're not watching on YouTube, you're missing out, folks. That's all I can say. So much more to talk about coming up in the next hour. Keir Starmer, we're told, intends to push ahead with his deal to seize sovereignty of the Chagos Islands and double the £9 billion originally offered to Mauritius to lease back Diego Garcia. So leasing back something we already own. It's a joint UK-US military base, very militarily significant. Now, that is what's being claimed by the Mauritian Prime Minister. Now, after Prime Minister's questions, which has just started, Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, he's actually tabled an urgent question asking for a minister to respond on what is the latest state of play with that deal for the Chagos Islands. Obviously, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has put the question asked him. He's actually in Ukraine at the current time. He won't be answering that question, but we'll see whether that does come up after PMQs. Of course, Peter Caldwell is watching PMQs, usual rules, so he's watching it, so we don't have to. We'll bring you the highlights a little bit later with him. We're also going to be talking about NHS staff who boasted of their anti-whiteness. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has said it's an attack on misguided diversity and inclusion agendas. Basically, we need to wipe all of that stuff out of every single public body, and private company as well. It's basically a sort of pro-black becomes anti-white. We just used to call it by one thing, didn't we? Racism. That's what it is. Going to talk about all of that coming up. Plenty more besides. Lots more of your calls to go as well. 0344 499 1000, asking you particularly about Donald Trump and his plans for the US to take over the Gaza Strip, relocate Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt, although they've said they don't want them, and turn Gaza into what he calls the Riviera of the Middle East. I have a funny feeling there may well be a Trump hotel and casino complex as part of that plan. Lots of your thoughts coming in, lots of other different topics as well. But Benedict Spence, let's go back to the Chagos Islands deal, because I have to say I thought that was pretty much what we're going to be leading on today until we woke up to what Donald Trump had to say with Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House overnight. New reports out yesterday claim that the new Mauritian Prime Minister, who's been in since December and who sort of held back on this deal over the Chagos Islands, that he basically said, yeah, we're going ahead with this Chagos Island deal, where bizarrely the British government is going to hand over, not hand back, they've never owned it, hand over the Chagos Islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean, many thousands away from Mauritius, to Mauritius, under some bizarre claim which was held up by an international court, which isn't binding at all. And the Mauritians are going to be paid, we were told, $9 billion by our taxpayers' money for the privilege of then leasing back the Diego Garcia military base, jointly owned and run by the UK and the US military forces, for the privilege. Now we're told that could be 18 billion quid. Now, wonderful Tom Harwood, who's a friend of mine at Riviera Station, made a very, very valid point, which is that if you work it out over 100 years for that lease, that's actually £350 million a week. Well, put that on the side of a red bus is the suggestion. What do you make of this deal?
Well, somebody else has gone through this sort of line by line and worked out a whole raft of policies that the Labour Party could afford to pay for. Would you like to know?
Because we haven't got any money, remember?
Would you like to know some of the things that you could?
Love to know what they are.
Universal free school meals, very Labour Party, very popular. National living wage rise for care workers. Free bus travel nationwide for everyone. Double the number of medical school places in the UK.
That would be a good idea.
The removal of the two-child benefit cap. Restoring winter fuel payments to pensioners. A rapid mass transport system for Leeds city centre, 16,000 new police officers, and we'd still have change for a new Type 31 frigate.
Sorry, that's all of it.
That's all of it. All of it.
Oh.
All of it.
I'd vote for a lot of that.
Doesn't that sound like a great policy platform?
Better deal than giving away something we own to someone who has no right to it as well. Absolutely extraordinary.
Somebody on Twitter has gone through that and worked that all out, and Tom Harwood, in fact, of a rival station, has retweeted that. It's if people want to find it. And I find that fascinating, that we are in a position where this government cares more about a non-binding advisory decision by an international criminal court somewhere else, based who knows where, appointed by who knows who, They care more about that than literal benefits. Literal
British
positive
people
things for the
whose
British
money
taxpayer.
will be spent.
Absolutely.
It is mind-blowing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV as well. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate message. Right, well, let's get straight to my next guest on this very topic, Lord Robotham. He's a former Conservative Armed Forces Minister, and very much appreciate you joining us, Lord Robotham. But just first of all, I mean, let's just go back to basics on this deal. This was the decision of the ruling from an international court, but it's non-binding. Why do you think that the Labour government, with so much on its plate when they took over last July, and apparently finding this massive black hole and all the problems we've got in the world, the Ukraine war, what was going on in Gaza, you name it, all things, they decided that this was a massively important, vital, urgent issue that had to be dealt with, got straight down to it. What is the thinking behind this, do you believe?
Well, I think you have to understand, I'm sure you do, Julia, that this is a government by left-wing human rights lawyers. Starmer is a great chum of Hermer. They've worked together, Hermer, the Attorney General. Philippe Sands, who represents Mauritius, again, they've worked together in the same chambers and they're great friends. And they've come up with this bonkers idea. You've already explained half it, but the International Court of Justice at the time, which published this advisory opinion, I believe, and you can check this out, had amongst its 15 judges, it had a Somali, well known for their upholding the rule of law. It had a Chinese judge and a Russian judge. Now, why we think it is better to listen to these people than to listen to national interest, I don't know. But what is happening is basically Starmer, Hermer, Sands don't really like this country. They're a bit ashamed of its past.
Yes.
I'm very proud of our history, but they are not. They're ashamed of it, and they're trying to root out everything like that. Now, this is a really, really big issue about security. I understand.
Well, can I say, I want to come to the security issue on that side, but the interesting thing is, lots of friends, and I heard this on the BBC, as always this morning, giving it back to the Mauritians. The Mauritians never own Chagos. If it's a colonial issue, give it to the Chagosians. So I think only 5% of the population Chagos is actually
absolutely right.
But this was a French colony that was given to us as part of a military deal, a French defeat, and then Mauritius was also a French colony. So we're going to randomly give something that Mauritius has never had any ownership of to Mauritius. But the crucial thing here is, coming onto the military side of these things, is that no one was really demanding this. This is a bizarre thing that we could have just gone, batted away and said, thank you very much, goodbye, not interested. But again, there were long negotiations going on under the various different Tory governments, which kept being kicked into the long grass. But Mauritius is now very much hand in hand with China. A lot of their funding is coming from China. And the big concern about the military bases is that this is a vital military base. It's been used in some of the military activity we've had in the Middle East to protect allies and to fight ourselves. But also, crucially, the concern that the Chinese could then build on nearby atolls, could basically be able to monitor what was going on with American and British military vessels, including nuclear vessels. That is a huge military concern.
If you put it like that, I just say it's completely bonkers.
The
Chinese are not our enemies, but they are certainly our adversaries in this case. And the Americans who rely on this base are, I understand that President Trump is very exercised by this. God willing, he will veto it. I think it's just absolutely extraordinary. But you have to understand, again, these left-wing lawyers that are now around the country, these human rights lawyers, don't care about that. They don't care about our security. They care about dotting the I's and crossing the T's of international judgments, however bonkers and bad these international judgments are. And we must stand up for British and Western security interests.
Well, your party leader, Kemi Badenoch, at Prime Minister's Questions in the last few minutes has said that this is an immoral surrender. She's talked about how when Labour negotiates, our country loses. There's no doubt at all that what happens to the Chagos Islands, which when this first came into the news some months ago, I've got to be honest with you, we went to a break and I quickly Googled where the hell they were. I'm not going to lie about it. I think we should be honest about this. Oh yes, knowing all about the history of the Chagos Islands, of course, rubbish. Most people in this country never heard of them. But the key thing is that this isn't an issue that for many people, I think the Labour would expect to have traction. But it is having more traction. Most of us didn't know where the Falkland Islands were back in the beginning of 1982 either, but we soon learnt where they were. The key thing here is that this is a strategic, very important military base. There's no reason legally for us to have to give it to anyone, least of all a country that's got actually no claim on it many thousands away. But do you think the motivation is genuinely that, well, you know, we're all human rights lawyers and this is what we do? Do they want to be, again, is it we want to be thought of as terribly nice on the international dinner party circuit, not just in the North London dinner party circuit? Or is there something more sinister? Because my concern is, I think an awful lot of senior people in this country, of the great and the good, are actually captured by China. They don't know they are. I'm not saying they're double agents, not accusing that, but they simply do not understand that they're being played by what is a hostile nation state that is guiding their hand behind this.
Well, I agree with you. Don't forget Philippe Sands, who's the lawyer acting for the Mauritian government, is being paid by the Mauritian government. So, you know, this is definitely a conflict of interest. And he is talking to Starmer, I am sure, and to Hermer. Now, Hermer, the Attorney General, is now interfering in everything because he is very left-wing, as is witnessed by his past, and he doesn't like this country's history. They're trying to get rid of it. And frankly, we should call them out for what they are.
Which is, well, you've said bonkers, but I mean, do you agree with Kemi Badenoch? They're immoral?
I think it's immoral. I think it's really stupid. And the Chinese are very clever. I don't have anything against Chinese, but as I said, they're not.
I have an issue with the Chinese government. I don't have an issue with the Chinese people, but the Chinese government is a murderous, tyrannical, hostile nation state. I mean,
I won't go as far as to call them hostile, but I'll call them an adversary, because they are, you know, they are working for their own interests as they see them, and they're definitely working to establish hegemony.
I tell you what, wouldn't it be nice if our government worked for our own interests once? That would be good, wouldn't it? Lord Robertson, so appreciate you joining us, former Conservative Armed Forces Minister. Very strong words there from him, and very strong words, Benedict Spence. From Kemi Badenoch, this is an immoral surrender when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. I mean, don't know how anyone could disagree with this.
You can't, but of course what will then happen is Labour are able to turn around and go, and who was it who started the negotiations on this? Oh, that's right, it was James Cleverly. When in fact what they should have done is straight off the bat gone, no, we're not even going to entertain. And it all sort of feeds into this idea of, a very sort of Foreign Office brain. Oh, well, you have to do this. You have to sort of begin these negotiations. You have to keep these lines of communications, not just to talk to the Mauritians, but also, to smooth over things with other African nations. It's the same thing as why actually sometimes we entertain, raising these things with the Argentinians. Whenever we want to talk to them about something, they go, yes, Las Malvinas is one. We go, yeah, sure, we'll talk about that at some point. But rather than just telling them where to go, which is what we should do. And if we were a serious country, is exactly what we would do. But we're not, because actually these people care a lot more about the very important international community.
But again, bearing in mind, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the same one, that has numerous decisions against Israel, but seems remarkably unbothered, Syria and Sudan,
North Korea.
I mean, I'm sorry, it's just absurd. These are highly political bodies now. And one of the things I really like about what Donald Trump is doing in the States, I've got a lot of issues with a lot of things he does, but vastly the good is outweighing the bad right now, is that he's basically saying, pulling out of a lot of these international bodies. And again, they don't accept the jurisdiction of these international bodies anyway. The Americans are not subject to foreign courts, they say. It does seem to me that the many people at the heart of Labour and Lib Dems, and it's all part of that whole Remainer-Ramona thing, they genuinely believe somehow that not only are courts superior to elected, accountable politicians, as in the whole, but we can't change them, that's the law. No. You're politicians. We elect you to make laws, change laws. You can make the law and change the law, and then they have to enact it. They actually think that foreign courts, whether it's the European Court of Human Justice, whether it's the European Court of Human Rights, whether it is the International Court of Justice, all of these other bodies, that they are superior to our own courts. I find that very, very worrying.
I mean, there's two ways to look at that. The first is that sort of reliance on courts over politicians is because in the eye of many, and we shouldn't even just say left-wing, a lot of them are liberals, frankly. So this idea that fascism is only a vote away and you can't trust the people, and that's how you stop fascism is by having these mechanisms that mean that the dastardly people can't get their way. So that's why they're very pro that. The other thing, though, is when it comes to the issue of international courts, international treaties, this is the sign of a country that has given up on the idea of being a power, because actually it only works then if everybody is sort of subservient to this greater idea. So I understand where that idea comes from, because there is, frankly, a declinist attitude in the UK, which is is to say that we should accept our place amongst all the nations, and it is a self-loathing thing. A lot of it comes from the idea of empire.
It's not the rest of us.
Yeah, but the actual countries that are making differences in the world, and let's be honest, two of them are not friendly towards us, that's China and Russia, they don't care about this stuff. They just go, what Elon Musk says, you can just do things. And you can just do things. If you turn around and go, I'm going to take this piece of territory, and what are you going to do? A lot of countries will go, well, we're going to protest in the international courts. But you know what a lot of other countries do? They just go, well, we're going to keep on trading with you anyway. Yeah. You know, especially in the case of Russia.
Yeah, I find it utterly bewildering. But this is my thing. The decision on the Chagos Islands is so bewildering.
Yeah.
This is where there must be another explanation.
Oh, it is simply because...
Obviously, Keir Starmer's human rights lawyer mates are all making a fortune, by the way.
If your worldview is that international human rights law is the most important thing, actually this makes complete sense.
Oh, okay.
It does make complete sense. It acts against national interest. That's where the ideology has warped people's way of thinking.
Let me ask you about another story again. Again, another big question mark about Keir Starmer's judgment. Now, we already had we had lockdown and we had Partygate, and it was pretty one of the major reasons that Boris Johnson was forced out, and he says, I was forced out. Well, actually, you fell on your sword, mate. There weren't enough people who were willing to serve in your government. You had to go. I think it was bang to rights. I thought it was outrageous that he should impose these rules on other people, preventing people saying goodbye to their loved ones, meeting their grandchildren, going to work, earning a living, children going to school, wearing masks, and all the time they were having a nice big party at Number 10. I am still apoplectic with rage about this. When even the stuff comes in the news, my whole body tenses up. I'm so angry about it. But here's the thing. Keir Starmer, there were big question marks about his curry and beer night all those years ago. And there were no charges brought on that. I still think he was bang to rights on that one, as in he actually had breached the rules. Again, there are always technicalities, and if you were technically a key worker, you get away with it. I think it was all rinky-dink stuff. Now, here's the thing. He's back in the news again and again now in the last few weeks over his meeting on Christmas Eve 2020 with his voice coach, we're told. Well, this voice coach happened to just be an actress who obviously was a really, really good friend. Randomly, was a really good friend of him, and he knew his husband very, very well. Well, the voice coach, Leonie Mellinger, it's made it very clear she didn't start working for the Labour Party until January 2021, so a few weeks later. We know that she was in Labour head office. We know she got the train. We also know she came from Tier 3 and travelled into Tier 4. London had gone into Tier 4 a couple of days earlier, when those COVID restrictions, which was virtual lockdown to all intents and purposes. You were forbidden from working out of your home if you didn't have to, if you could work from home. You were also forbidden from travelling into a higher tier. She definitely did both those things. Yeah. She'd been tweeting about how she was working from home. She'd done other Zoom calls with Keir Starmer. By the way, I'm not sure she did much to deal with his wooden presentation, if you judge by the actual statement he made that evening about Brexit, which he made on Christmas Eve. The rest of us, we're trying to have a normal life. There's no doubt at all in my mind now that was a clear lockdown breach. Now, she would be the person making the breach, I think, but he would have been condoning it when he was telling other people, you can't see your families, you can't go out to work, you can't earn a living. But where does this go?
This should be fully investigated, and if it can be proven that the rules were broken, they should be prosecuted. That's what we should be doing by the letter of the law, and it is a breach of that if we don't do that. And it doesn't matter that it was X many years ago. If that is what we're going to stick to, which was that these regulations were necessary and right, then they should be prosecuted if there is sufficient evidence. It should not be swept under the carpet. But morally, politically, I actually think this is a really great opportunity for Labour to do something that they are not going to do. Let's be clear, this is pie in the sky, which is to turn around and go, it was an emergency situation, many mistakes were made, we are going to begin the process actually of, certainly for people for whom it was very minor things and were unfairly punished, actually we should have an amnesty on this. Actually, far too many people were hounded completely unnecessarily, and I think it would really help. I think it would really help a lot of people restore some trust in government if the government turned around and go, it was an emergency, we made emergency decisions, and after the fact we're prepared to admit we got it wrong, and we're going to go through the process, and we're going to compensate, and we're going to give people pardons and amnesties because it was an emergency, but we got it wrong, and we're prepared to do that. But they are not going to do that. But do you know what?
They still think they did the right thing, and they still think the rules were for the stupid people like us, because they were clever enough to be able to not catch COVID.
I'm putting it out there. A political party that wants to be in power would do well to consider that as a moment for the nation to heal and move on, because a lot of people are angry about it.
Never forget. forget, because we're going to be living with the consequences of this, our economy, our mental health, our education, everything, for the end of time. We really are. 12:21 is the time. We're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to be finding out about just the latest woke madness. It's just basically racism by any other name. We're also going to be finding out what's been happening at PMQs. It's been a very lively one. Very lively comments from Kemi Badenoch, strong defences, well, you would think, from Keir Starmer. We've had a question from Nigel Farage and as well. It's all about the Chagos Islands. We'll come to that very, very soon. Do stay tuned. This is Talk.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear, will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Very much appreciate your company. Right now, we're going to, there's been very lively PMQs, by the way. We're going to get to some highlights of that with Peter Cardwell coming up very, very soon. First up, though, let's talk about, the latest diversity and inclusion agendas in the NHS, would you believe, which even Health Secretary Wes Streeting has said are misguided. NHS staff boasting of their anti-whiteness, would you believe? Let's talk about this with James Esses. He's a social commentator and co-founder of Thoughtful Therapists, and doing a magnificent job, by the way, exposing an awful lot of the madness of how this agenda has taken over so many of our institutions. A very, very good afternoon to you, James.
Hi, Julia.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, it is absolutely extraordinary that there's this extraordinary briefings and agendas and sort of guidance for staff that go around many public bodies and indeed many private institutions. You've exposed it across the board, local councils, NHS, John Lewis, you name it, where it's happened. What is this particular diversity scheme about, and what are they actually claiming?
Well, this harks back to something that I broke a few months ago, in which an NHS trust hiring trainee psychologists essentially said that they wanted clinicians who would practice using a quote-unquote anti-whiteness model. And
they didn't hide it. That was actually the phrase they used.
Yeah. That's the exact phrase they use. And, it's nice of the health secretary to wake up from his slumber and act as if he's had some sort of big epiphany. But he described this as well-meaning but misguided. And I would say that is a complete and utter fudge. This is out and out anti-white racism. Can you imagine if the NHS were trying to hire people to practice using a anti-blackness model?
Well, exactly. We're told the rules are always very different. Now, what's interesting is, you get to the likes of the East London NHS Foundation Trust saying a post was shared last year by one colleague using their own social media, which does not in any way represent the views, values or recruitment practices of the trust, and this matter was addressed internally. Blah, 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 blah. But the truth is, and you've looked into this, and I read the original report you wrote. Basically all of the bodies involved in training up psychologists now are fully signed up to an agenda that is, Black Lives Matter, in smarter clothes. It's full on, Stonewall, trans pride stuff pushing a lot of this agenda. And basically, if you don't sign up to this, if you don't, as a white person, for instance, or someone who, as a woman, or say you will basically kowtow and agree this agenda and agree that you being white, for instance, is problematic and you are by definition a problem, racist, colonial, an oppressor, then you basically are not going to be allowed to practice as a psychologist. And this is pretty much what happened to you in your training, isn't it?
It is. People are being cancelled because of the colour of their skin, because of their beliefs and opinions. And, you can't win in this game, because if a white trainee raises concerns about this, well, they'll be told that they've got white fragility and they should go and check their privilege. I mean, just to give a few examples from the last couple of weeks to show that this is across the piece, the British Psychological Society, which regulates psychologists, described whiteness as a mutating disease and said that white colleagues might need to give up their jobs for black colleagues. Yeah. Mental Health First Aid, which puts first aiders that deal with mental health in companies up and down the length of the country, said that there is no such thing as anti-white racism. 3 police forces joined together and published a recent standards document where they've banned the use of terms like blacklist and black sheep on the basis that they are racist. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So it's nice for West Streeting to finally come out and say it, but this stuff's been going on for years.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I've always thought West Streeting was pretty much at the very much the sane end on these sort of politics. But nevertheless, you don't get to be a Labour MP or a Labour frontbencher unless you sign up to an awful lot of this madness. And it is madness. And I think most people, and certainly my audience, recognise it as madness. And I think most people in most organisations do. The trouble is, this stuff is pushed by the bosses. This is pushed by the HR departments and the trading departments. And there is this whole... There's just almost this whole sort of industry. Let's call it what it is. It's an industry where everybody pushes this. You can't get a contract if you're a small supplier with any major organisation, public or private, unless you sign up to this agenda and prove that you're signed up to it. People want to be on this Stonewall list where they're approved and being, a trans ally and things like that. But I think for a lot of people, they felt like a lot of the trans issue didn't become an issue. It's not for them. It's only when women go, well, hold on a minute, my sport's being ruined. And I'm no longer able to be in a changing room without a man with his penis out. And frankly, yes, that does bother us, as it would bother most people. But the sort of anti-white racism has really, really cut through. And look, people like me, Mike Graham and others, we were speaking out from day one when Black Lives Matter were making their demands, pointing out this was a racist organisation. This wasn't about something I absolutely agree with, which is that absolutely Black Lives Matter. And you can't, when young black men are being killed by police in America, you need to pay attention to this. But it's become anti-white, and it is based on a completely discredited theory. It's critical race theory, which is basically Marxism, isn't it? It's this oppressor oppressed. If someone is down, there must be an oppressor. The oppressor, in this case, is always the white person. The oppressed, the victim, is always the black person. And it sees this sort of, all of our relations in this very strange, very outdated power dynamic. But this has taken hold in so many institutions. How do we get rid of it? I mean, do you think what Donald Trump is doing in the States is going to get rid of it in America? Could we try something like that here? Or is it now so embedded it's going to take decades?
Well, it's great to see what Trump's doing over there. I think there's a fat chance in hell that will ever catch on with this Labour government. But the thing is, actually allowed under our legislation, if we take the Equality Act, it allows so-called affirmative action or positive discrimination. Recently, I saw an advert by the National Education Union hiring an equalities lead, except they said that the candidate selected must be black. Doesn't sound very equal to me, but the fact is this type of thing is underpinned in our law. So you know what you've got to do. If you want to promote equality of opportunity in the United Kingdom, you stop judging people positively or negatively based on their skin colour or any other immutable characteristic, and you start judging them on their merit.
Mad idea. It'll never catch on. I'd like to point out the flaw in this, as you said, if you want equality of opportunity, that's what most people want. They think that people, whether they're born in a council house on an estate or in a country estate, or they're white or black or a man or a woman, gay or straight or whatever, that actually they should have the same opportunities. You work hard, you should get decent education, you should get good healthcare, you should be able to get ahead. That's not what diversity, equity and inclusion is about. It's righting the wrongs of centuries past, apparently. And it's also about equity. It's about outcome. Equity means we're all at lowest common denominator living in mud huts. That's the ultimate outcome of equity, because if you give two people £100 and one of them invests in a shovel or something and starts building things and making money, and one of them just buys booze and gets drunk, at the end of the day one of them's going to be richer than the other one. And then you just have to basically give some more money to the person who's done nothing. Eventually there will be nothing to go around. Equity is sort of anti-wealth, anti getting ahead, anti opportunity of every kind. But that's what these people are signed up to. But again, this is Marxism. I mean, this is what I think people don't get. This is Marxism.
Well, quite right. And if you ask, your average member of the public who they want flying their aeroplane or performing their surgery in hospital, they don't care who they're having sex with or the colour of their hair or their gender identity. They just want someone who can do the bloody job.
It's a mad idea, but it might one day catch on. One day. James Esses, you've been doing fantastic stuff. I have to say, I do encourage people to follow James Esses online and see his work, because he has been exposing so much of this going on. And if you're a whistleblower, you want to expose it going on in your organisation, get in touch with him online. He's a social commentator, co-founder of Thoughtful Therapists. Thoughts on this, Benedict Spence? Because, by the way, you're a white middle-class guy. You went to private school. You're straight. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure this system's ever going to work for you again.
I disagree with James Esses. I care about who my pilot's having sex with. Who's flying the plane? That's kind of a fundamental problem right there. Obviously, I have to make jokes about this because it's a laughable situation. We shouldn't be giving it the airtime, but we have to.
It's laughable
because this is.
But it's the reason why our country's going down the drain.
This complete separation from reality has become reality, and now we have to deal with that. And that is as demoralising as everything else. Again,
he's been a miserable old sod today, hasn't he?
I cracked a joke. It was a good joke. Cracked a couple of jokes.
It was a very good joke. 12:35, while we invite you. 12:35 is the time. More for Benedict Spence. Coming up, we're going to be hearing from Peter Cardwell about what's been going on in a very lively PMQs. There's also an urgent question from Nigel Farage to the Foreign Secretary, who's David Lamb is actually out of the country, but asking, what is the state of affairs with this deal with Chagos? How many billions of your and my hard-earned taxpayers' money isn't going to go to pay pensioners' winter fuel, but it's actually going to go to the Mauritian government? This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:38 is the time. Coming up, Prime Minister's questions is still taking place. We are waiting to get an urgent question being asked by Nigel Farage in a few moments' time. PMQs never ends when it's supposed to end at 1:30, as you well know. I'm still in the studio, as in Benedict Spence. We'll be joined very, very soon by Peter Cardwell. And look, there was an awful lot for the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bade, not to go on today. There's an awful lot there to talk about. I mean, we've got the Chagos Islands, we've got some questions, lots of questions being raised about breaching of lockdown rules. Although, again, I think for a lot of MPs, they probably breach them themselves. They want to keep quiet about that, don't they? But what's going on in the Middle East, obviously a big issue, and we've been asking people today about this. Donald Trump says the US will take over the Gaza Strip, relocate Palestinians and turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. I want to know what people's reaction is to that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. I'm told we've got a little bit of a problem on our phone box at the moment, so I don't know if we'll be able to take those calls, but the Prime Minister has said during PMQs, Palestinians, he says, must be allowed home and to rebuild their community on the way to a two-state solution. I mean, again, it's kind of a... Yeah. They're kind of like trying desperately not to upset the US president, but they're obviously not convinced by this. Ed's been getting in touch, so he's got in touch on text or tweet on X, and he says the US has no legitimate sovereign interest in occupying Gaza. Trump needs to stifle his private property developer instincts while exercising public presidential power. Scott says Gaza's not his to take, typical US with its global bully attitude. Yeah, Scott, do you have a problem with the bully attitude of Hamas? Joey says that's not going to happen with Hamas still there. Wayne says it needs sorting out. It's untenable in its present state. Milo says absolutely loving it. Like really, really pleased for Israel. And to be honest, it'll be a good thing for the whole world. An end to this pointless conflict once and for all. Wow. Maria says, good idea. Presence in the Middle East will keep them in check. If this happens, America will become the greatest superpower for ages. Judy says, I've been saying this for years. So glad someone on the planet thinks like me and just might possibly have the power to make it happen. And Wendy says, I just wish we had a leader like this in the UK, a real leader. And many question also whether he's going to put a Trump hotel and casino there.
Well, I was going to say, the aesthetics of a Gaza run by Donald Trump. All the Hamas tunnels would be gold leaf and mirrors everywhere. It would be very odd.
He didn't say whether he would actually be
Do it
willing
himself.
to...
Yeah.
No, he didn't say whether he would be willing to put American troops. And he didn't say they wouldn't be American troops. Realistically, the American people, I mean, Congress even, would not be happy about this. How do you actually remove everybody from Gaza? Now, the IDF are able to do it. Literally, we're going to start bombing. If you don't leave northern Gaza, they move down. Then they bombed further and further. At the end of the day, I mean, how would they actually physically get the people of Gaza out of Gaza? And the quick question is, where would they go?
Well,
he says Egypt. He says Jordan. Those countries have made it very clear they don't want them.
I'll be honest. How do you get them out? If you were to open the border with Egypt, an awful lot of those people would go of their own volition. Actually, you know, it's an interesting test of how much they actually feel sort of committed to the land. If you were to give them, say, free access to Egypt, a free run, how many of them would go? I suspect a huge number of them would leave overnight. And then they'd use it as a springboard to go probably to the United States.
I'd say the giveaway is, if you don't want to leave, you're probably one of the problem people. But the reality is, the status quo can't remain.
No.
That can't remain. So the Israelis cannot put up with... Seriously, we would not put up with the equivalent of Gaza or next door to us being run by a Palestinian terrorist group. Let's say the Welsh and the English. I do not want to get in trouble.
Here we go.
Emails into Benedict, not me. No, but we wouldn't put up with it. No other country in the world would be expected to put up with it. It's untenable. The leaders of the Palestinians in Gaza do not want a two-state solution. No. The Prime Minister here, the Foreign Secretary and others, whittering away about a two-state solution is all very well, but do we actually think that's going to happen? Now, I'm going to... Nigel Farage, I believe, has just asked a question about the Chagos Islands. We'll get some more detail on that coming up. Right now, I think we're going to take a quick break, and then we get Peter Cardwell in the studio, and then we'll find out what has really been going on at PMQs. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
You know, you can't tell me that a voice coach who has previously done everything on Zoom suddenly needs to come to London to give Keir Starmer an emergency voice coach lesson on Christmas Eve. I'm not buying it. It's absolute BS, isn't it?
I think that lots of people will be asking that. And also, just again, the way in which Keir Starmer campaigned on this with such confidence, as you say, it does suggest that lots of his anger and comments about COVID throughout 2021 and 2022 were somewhat overblown, to say the least.
Yeah, no question at all.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:46 is the time. I'm delighted to say that Talk presenter Peter Cobwell has joined us in the studio to talk about PMQs. Almost as also say goodbye to Benedict Spence, because we have a bit of a squash and a squeeze at the end of the show, so I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to him on air. So a big thanks to Benedict. We'll be back again next week, obviously. Now, Peter, an awful lot of things that Kemi Badenoch, with her 6 questions as Tory leader, can go on today for PMQs. It looked like it was quite a lively one. What did she choose to ask about?
Well, unsurprisingly, the Chagos Islands, because of this huge row over a potential £18 billion that may well be given.
Which, of course, we've got
to get rid of them. Of course we do.
We've got a spare 18 billion.
18 billion. We've got a 22 billion black hole, Labour tells us, but there's 18 billion apparently to give to the Chagos Islands to get rid of them. Huge national security implications. Also, Nigel Farage asked a question, we're going to look at that a little bit later on, in terms of saying, hold on a second, we've taken a lot of money away from people. Well, actually, should we be giving it to those who want to take the Chagos Islands from us? But the big point, I thought, the main point in all of this was about the moral surrender of what happens in all of this, and that's what Kemi Badenoch asked about.
Absolutely. Well, let's have a little watch and listen to what Kemi Badenoch asked the Prime Minister.
When Labour negotiates, our country loses.
Yeah.
Yesterday, we heard the government offered £18 billion for Mauritius to take our territory in the Chagos Islands. This is money that belongs to our children and their children. This is an immoral surrender, so North London lawyers can boast at their dinner parties.
The last government conducted 11 of the 13 rounds of those negotiations, and, Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That is why this government has completed that process. When she became leader of the opposition, I said to her that I would give her a briefing on any national security issue if she asked for it. That's very important to the way that we run our democracy. She has not asked for a briefing on the Chagos Islands. And that's because she's more interested in chasing reform than in national security.
Interesting, the PM there mentioning reform there, but I don't know whether or not Kemi Badenoch's asked for a briefing, a security briefing on Chagos Islands. I'm not sure you'd need one. I would have thought it was bleeding obvious that you don't go around giving away military bases to a country that has no legal claim to it in law. I thought it was quite interesting, that point about that dig which Kemi Badenoch made, and it was something that previous Tory leaders have done as Prime Minister. This dig about the North London lawyers.
Yes,
this whole, she said it before, he's a lawyer, not a leader. Other criticisms have been made of the same thing. I mean,
and there are quite a few North London lawyers involved in this. Philippe Sands, for example,
they're all
is a big
mates
friend.
of Keir Starmer.
Richard Hermer, who's the Attorney General, all friends, and former colleagues of Keir Starmer as well, when he was at Doughty Street Chambers and later on in his career.
How much traction has this got? Because let's be honest, and we talked about this earlier. Look, most of us didn't know.
Where the Chagos Islands were.
If you're seeing it looking, well, of course I knew where the Chagos Islands were. Most of us had to Google it, right? Middle of the Indian Ocean, miles away, by the way, from Mauritius. Most of BBC Radio 4 don't seem to know that they've never been owned by Mauritius. By the way, keep saying giving them back to Mauritius. No such thing. There's no binding legal requirement under this ICJ ruling. ruling, which is an entirely politically motivated ruling anyway, as they always are at the ICJ.
It's a very political court.
Very political court, exactly. But that point that Keir Starmer made, though, so there have been negotiations for a long time about this since this ruling, and most of them being carried out by the Tories. But of course, they kind of sort of, were they just sort of kicking it around in the long grass? But literally within weeks of this government getting into office, the Labour getting into office, this was clearly a massive priority.
Yeah.
But why?
Well, it hasn't become a big political issue really until Labour took over, and I think that phrase that Keir Starmer mentioned about 11 of the 13 rounds of negotiation becoming a big political issue and 11 of the 13 happening under the Conservatives, I think we're going to hear a lot more of that. I suppose in terms of it coming to a conclusion, it's really happened in the last little while. Also, the political will is there in regard to this £18 billion, I should say, which may well be given to Mauritius.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, how much traction do you think this story has, though? Because again, most people don't know where it is, but it is a large sum of money. And I say, comments, on social media pointing out it's now gone up from £9 billion cost, according to the Mauritian PM, to an £18 billion cost. And if that is the case over 100 years, that does actually work out £350 million a year.
Well, exactly.
Which is a week. And put that on the side of a red bus and see how well that works.
But at the same time, the obscurity of this, I think, actually gives it some traction to say there's this island in the middle of nowhere that we're giving away. We're giving the country that's taking it 18 billion quid. I think a lot of people would just say, hold on a second, Chagos Islands, never heard of them. Why is the money not here in the UK?
And here's the thing,
it's more than the budget for overseas aid as well.
Most of us, which is still too big a budget, most of us hadn't heard of the Falkland Islands, mind you. I was early stages of secondary school then. You probably weren't born. But we darn well know where the Falkland Islands are now. Absolutely. You tell the British people we're going to give them away to Argentina. I think you'll find the British people have something to say about it. Now, I just want to skip ahead to something that happened a little bit later now. We know that there's currently an urgent question being answered, not by David Lamb, the Foreign Secretary. He's overseas in Ukraine at the moment. Lucky old Ukraine.
As if they haven't suffered enough.
I know. I mean, we'll keep the Russian bombs. Just take David Lammy away. But an urgent question tabled actually by Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, about what is the state of play with this Chagos deal, which again there was thought that it might be vetoed by Donald Trump because of the co-ownership of this military base in Diego Garcia, one of the islands in the Chagos Islands. But during PMQs, Nigel Farage did actually ask a question about Chagos Islands. Let's hear what he had to say.
25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Germans.
Well, I mean, that went
Not
down
really an
well.
answer.
Well, it went down well on the Labour benches, didn't it? But again, this is the thing. It's this £18 billion figure. When you've got, I mean, look, this is kind of meaningless money to most of us, isn't it? I mean, how many zeros is that? And actually, you break it down to, like, what as actually, Benedict Spence was quoting some people online who were pointing out all the different things we could spend £18 billion on now, rather than, over 100 years giving it to the Mauritian government with no claim to these islands at all, thousands of miles from them. But 18 billion quid is a lot of money, but you compare that with the, £22 billion black hole, when you compare it to all the money we're told we don't have to spend on, get more operations and hiring more doctors and the NHS and more teachers.
And we're going to hear a lot more about this over the next few months. Yeah, we're going to hear a lot more about this over the next few months because the spending review is happening. Government departments are being told there's no money, we've got to squeeze, we've got to squeeze
and
these
we're told
budgets.
There's going to be no more borrowing and no more taxes, so that means spending cuts.
It certainly does, and from government departments and services that are real services for real people. It was interesting with Nigel Farage as well there, just before, I didn't include it because there's about 2 minutes actually of just people shouting at him trying to get his words out, trying to ask the question, and then Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, actually said, said, look, I just want to hear this. Can we just let Nigel Farage say it? And I think that he was treated actually very badly by fellow parliamentarians.
Oh, and then I think they never understand just quite how bad that does. What I noticed that he did say, he started his question, what do I say to my 25,000 residents of Clacton? And there were shouts of resign, I resign to people. But again, it's a very popular figure. And again, there's always this stuff about, if he ever goes to Clacton. I happen to know Nigel Farage well, I know Richard Tice well. They spend pretty much every single weekend, long periods of time, in their constituencies doing constituency work. They know perfectly well, like most sensible MPs, that work that you do is what pays off in the long term. Hey, there'd be no point trying to become the next Prime Minister if you weren't even an MP at the next election because you hadn't actually done a good job as a constituency MP. Let's go back quickly, though, to another question from Kemi Bejano. What was this about?
Well, this is about GB Energy. She was essentially saying that even the chairman of GB Energy says that only about 1,000 jobs will be created and it may take 20 years. So what's the point, essentially?
There was an extraordinary interview with the boss of GB who was really quite unhappy. He was Starmerishly unhappy about being asked a question. Let's have a watch and listen to that.
Mr. Speaker, it's so hard to believe anything he says. This is a man who needed emergency voice coaching on Christmas Eve. This government is so clueless. It is borrowing £8 billion for GB Energy, a vanity project that is not great, not British, and does not produce any energy. Its own chairman, Mr. Speaker, admitted it will take 20 years to create just 1,000 jobs. Meanwhile, 200,000 jobs are at stake in our oil and gas sector right now. Does he think that 1,000 jobs in 20 years' time are worth more than the 200,000 jobs we have now?
Prime Minister.
Again, she clearly hasn't been briefed or doesn't want to be briefed. GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company that will drive the move to renewables. That is not about the number of jobs in HQ. It's about the thousands upon thousands of jobs they will generate to give us energy security, something we didn't have under the last government, take Putin's boot off our throat.
I don't know how convincing all of that was, I have to say. But I mean, the GB Energy thing is just, most people thought, when we were told that we're going to create GB Energy, they're going to create like a nationalised energy company that's going to provide. No, it doesn't do anything. It literally doesn't do anything.
Not that
it just
great,
costs
not that
a
much
fortune.
energy. No energy, in fact.
I mean,
GB Energy.
Literally, and won't create jobs, won't save us money.
May actually take jobs away.
By the way, all the stuff I've been saying for years, it's almost like I'm right a lot of the time, if not all of the time. No, but I'm just throwing that. Can I ask you, just finally, all this stuff about Keir Starmer and another lockdown breach. London was in Tier 4 in December 2020, just before Christmas, and his speech therapist, inverted commas, happens just to be an actress and happens to also be a good friend of, that wife of one of his good friends, Leonie Mellinger. She came to visit him in Labour HQ, left Tier 3 to go to Tier 4, definitely against the rules, not working from home when she could have. We know she did the rest of her clients against the rules. Is this going anywhere?
I think it is, actually. I think a lot of people are very annoyed about it. Also, Christmas Eve, why on earth would you do that? I think a lot of people have
it is weird.
It is a bit weird, isn't it? Maybe I think a lot of people have other priorities then.
Yes.
Also, how much did he pay her to be his voice coach, and has he asked for the money back?
I have to say, I did look up the statement he made on the Brexit deal on that evening, and I've tweeted it out yesterday. I mean, I'm not sure that she was worth whatever they were paying her. I think she might owe him money, just saying. I'm not sure this one is going away.
No, I agree with you. It's from a big new book called Get In by Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogrund. It's going to be released next week.
Yeah, we were talking to Gabriel on the show earlier this week. Peter Caldwell, talk presenter, fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us. Ian Collins is here.
I've been crunching the numbers. You said you're right most of the time. I've been to who'sright.com.
Collins versus Hartley-Brewer.
You hit 89% on a regular basis.
I'll take that.
I've got 91.
Oh,
David Ball, 8%. I'm just saying, all right?
Christo, 0.
What about
Christo,
Peter Caldwell?
He's in a different league.
Oh, don't you have a go at Christo?
Caldwell, 100%.
I mean, is it his website? What are you going to be talking about, other than utter abject nonsense?
Abject nonsense, absolutely right. We are, of course, going to talk about Donald Trump and what he said. I think you nailed it at the beginning in your intro. It says, are these the words of a very clever operator or an utter madman?
I don't think
it's quite hard to work it out. But is there a wider thing going on in what he's trying?